Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this panel, which the focus of is contemporary television and contemporary feature film nominees for the LMGI Awards. Before we get going, I want to tell you a little bit about the LMGI. The LMGI is a nonprofit whose sole reason for existence is to unite location professionals and to promote awareness of our role in the motion picture, television, commercial, and print production industries. We do that through a variety of educational programs and public relations and marketing efforts, including the LMGI Awards and the Compass magazine, which we're all supposed to be showing our Compass magazines. Which is incredible magazine, really, you guys. It's got articles. If you haven't seen it and you're not members, it has articles about, written by location managers from around the world on pretty much all of the major projects that are going on or have been airing, and it's a really amazing. The Compass magazine features amazing photography and articles about and written about the location pros from around the world. When you're an LMGI member, you receive the magazine quarterly. We're your people. We are all location pros here. If you're interested in joining, volunteering, putting on educational programming, promoting what we do, join us. You can check us out at locationmanagers.org. Let's now meet the nominees. Go ahead, take it away, Sasha.
Right. First up, we have The Killer, and joining us for that are Bill Doyle and Rosita Kanata. For a little context, The Killer, we've got nondescript hotels to European sidewalks and lush jungles. All the versatile locations in this film reflect the adaptability and resourcefulness of its protagonist as he battles his employers after a botched assassination. Key scenes were filmed in Paris's Latin Quarter with views of the Pantheon Dome, and the Dominican Republic offered a quaint village and luxury seaside retreat to capture the assassin's sense of peace and seclusion in his hideout. An elegant waterfront restaurant in the nearby St. Charles reveals a moneyed and sophisticated world that hides murderous motives, while one artful combat sequence in a dilapidated New Orleans house showcases how the assassin uses his environment to his advantage. For anyone who's seen the film, or even maybe just from that description, we are all over the place in The Killer. So perhaps we can start with both Bill and Rosita just kind of saying, how were you involved with this project in, geographically speaking? How is that divided up?
Sure. I'm involved in it as David Fincher's producer and the person who deals with all his locations and all his shows for the last 7 years. So about a year out from actual filming, I get the script and it is all over the place. Obviously, we can't afford to do more than 3 moves. So we have to figure out how to break it down into smaller places. But we knew one thing: Paris was going to be Paris. Simple as that. Everywhere else is how to figure out how to cheat and how to combine. Because we were in Houston and New Orleans and New York and Florida and Chicago and everywhere else. So my role was overall figuring out the whole thing and figuring out where we're going to base and how we're going to do stages, and then getting into the nitty-gritty of actually getting out and doing a good 2 months of scouting, almost 10 months out. But for Paris, it was always that. Now, those guys were busy as heck with John Wick. I'm sure that was a lot of fun. But we definitely had Stephanie doing some great scouting for us. David being extremely particular about that whole setup of that whole part of the movie. So that was the most detailed and the hardest thing, to be honestly, to put it together. So I'm not going to talk about Paris at all. I did not go. I supervised everything as it came in with Stephanie. And then after that, I had to deal with some big stuff in the DR, New Orleans, and Chicago. So I'll let Rosita talk a little bit about Paris, and then I'll jump back in.
Sure. And Rosita, how many different locations total did there end up being in Paris? Because we get to see so much of this beautiful city and end up in places that maybe we wouldn't normally get to film in, perhaps. And I definitely have a question about the airports. There were a lot of airports in this film. And I believe you did actually get to film at Charles de Gaulle. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, we had a lot of location in Paris. And it was amazing to work with David Fincher because he exactly knew what he wanted. And I really would like to say something, that I've never worked with a director who comes for location scouting like 4 or 5 months before filming, and he provide us with detailed shooting schedule, and then nothing changes in the plan when he returns for the shoot. And we had to swap the 2 airport dates due to the last minute unavailability of the planes we had reserved for the filming. And I was so surprised, because it's amazing to work with someone who exactly know, even on the planning, you know. And when we this helps us a lot, because in a location like an airport, the authorization, the permit, we had to ask like 2 months before, with the precise listing of people. We cannot, for example, let people enter to the airport if they are not in the list, or we cannot add lights if we didn't tell them exactly where and when to put, you know, lights in certain spaces and locations. And in the airport, we had like one terminal just for us, and we rented 2 real airplanes. So I have to say that when we said that the movie was directed by David Fincher, this helped a lot. So everybody was proud and happy to have him in the airport. And even Air France, for example, give us a lot of flexibility. So everything was for real. I mean, even the airplane, we didn't go in a studio. About, you know, Paris, we had two planes, and we worked on it with all the crew, and we work in some private area like Air France Saloon. With it was amazing. I mean, it was really, I was really proud to belong to this crew for this movie. And I have to say to William that I'm really jealous that he worked with him since a few years. And then grand bravo for all the things that you did also in your locations. So if you want to ask me something specific.
Yeah, there was one specific scene in the movie where we were sort of at a McDonald's walk-up window, but were we actually filming at a McDonald's? And that sort of brings some clearance issues, as well as like crowds in the public. So maybe you can tell us something about that.
Yes, it was amazing. It was amazing because the scene in front of McDonald's was quite short, and David Fincher didn't even want us to block off the streets. What I do remember, however, is that we spent a lot of time finding the right takeaway window that fits the scene, and the McDonald's staff was really thrilling. And something else I never would have imagined managing was filming this scene while allowing the restaurant to remain operational. We only used a very small exterior area of McDonald's, so it was very short. And if I have time to say something, a very funny anecdote from this day is that we didn't lock off the streets, so cars were passing by as usual. And it turns out that 2 of our vehicles, including 2 minivans, drove past the camera twice, and the only person who noticed was David Fincher, and he called the transport coordinator immediately to stop it. I've never seen such detailed attentions to every aspect. I don't know if it's always like this, William, you can tell me, but I was like amazed, you know. So
did you have some photos for filming in the plaza that you were able to share with us?
yes, of course. I will try to share.
Take a look at them.
Is a top shot of from the plaza. We were building here the bar, and I took this picture from the apartment that we rented to put all the cameras. And then the apartment in the 6 floors was the apartment that we used like reference where the killer was, the work space. This is the entrance of the target. And I would like to say something. This is a real building. There are families living here. And this is the building where the killer was. So just in front of the other one. And then a very nice, this is the bar under construction, but this is a fake one, but we recreated because we needed a place where we can create all the things that he wanted. So a bar, the main entrance, people passing by. This is a very nice pictures just to show you that the Pantheon behind the building is for real. And this is exactly what we said, what we saw from the apartment of the killer place.
Wow, that's remarkable.
This is amazing. And in this floor was the one that we used to recreate. I mean, it was a references because then all the interiors were in a studio, but the exteriors they're really like this. And the amazing thing is that, I mean, we used to control the families, the balconies, the lights, but here there are like a lot of people living here and everybody plays the game. I mean, they all play the game with us. It was really amazing. I mean, I have such a wonderful memories of this movie.
Those are some fantastic stories. Bill, I'm really curious to hear about some of the other locations as well, because we were in the Dominican Republic, we were in New Orleans. There was that scene with the shootout over at the Brute's house. I guess maybe tell us a little bit about the Dominican Republic, because we had that beautiful beach estate that I want to go stay at personally. So
yeah, I mean, it's that house is on the North Shore, and it's right near one of the new Amman Resorts hotels, so you can find it pretty easy. And that's how we located it. We were looking in Costa Rica, which would have been originally what it was written for. And David and his wife Sion were on vacation at the Amman Resort and walked by that house, and then said to, you know, here, get this, clear this house for us. And it is a billionaire's house. So that's, you know, unfortunately Bonnie couldn't make it, but Bonnie's the location manager out of the DR that I was connected with both by JJ Hook, who had just shot there in Lost City, and as the line producer on that, and also the folks at Atlantica, who are the main production service in town. And I'll tell you, Bonnie and his team are the equal to any other professional A team there is. So if you end up going to the DR, he is the person. That's the one department, because I had to produce that whole section. That's the one department I never had to worry about. So I'm really happy for Bonnie that his work got noticed as well. Yeah, that one, you know, unfortunately, Bonnie's the one who had to roll up his sleeves on that one a ton, and then I came in and was the closer on closing the deal. So somebody else had to lay over the barbed wire for those folks. But once it was done, we were able to just buy out a bunch of hotels along the coast and take care of that. We were there only about 4 or 5 nights. I have to tell Rosita, she's correct. One of the best lines I ever heard about David Fincher is from Robert Downey Jr. after Zodiac, where somebody asked him, "You're known to go on off book. What was it like working with David?" And he said, "How do you argue with a man where the entire movie is between his 2 ears?" And it's true. I've tech scouted stuff with David since Benjamin Button. At 6 months later, we shoot it exactly the way we tech scouted it. There is no change. So Spoiled, I believe, is my middle name and not Bill. Let's see. I think the hardest part in the DR was shooting in Santo Domingo, which is it makes driving in Rome look sedate and
So
peaceful.
what was difficult? Yeah, what was difficult about that? What were the like specific challenges you guys were facing?
It's even if there were lines on the road, nobody abides by them. It's absolute chaos in Santo Domingo. And the traffic, it makes Los Angeles look great as well. It's insane, and everyone's got a car, and it's so dealing with some of the stuff we had to deal with, especially this big run that was a good mile and a half underneath the main raised highway that goes literally dead center through Santo Domingo. So it's elevated. We're underneath. And this is where he's commandeered the cab and the taxi driver. And we're doing both runs with the cab, and we've got this little plate van that we've built out running in there. And there were 50 different ways to get into this road. And we had to block and clear and shut down all of it. So once again, an amazing job. It took a lot of people. It took a lot of people. I'm sure that the location department on that day had over 100 people working just closing that down. And that was only one of the 3 things that we shot that day in the city.
That's right, because like how much control were you able to have? Like
That's the thing. We had to have total control.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the equivalent is what Doug Dresser had showed me for Black Panther in Seoul, Korea, where they shut down that long stretch of one of the main drags in Seoul for that in the first movie, and it was daunting to be sure. Now, yeah, we were able to fudge with the schedule and do it on a Sunday and try and get the first 2 hours when everybody's at church, because it is a pretty religious country, and that helped me. But still, everyone's on a scooter there. Everyone's on a bicycle, a scooter, a motorcycle, and it's outside of just putting giant barricades across sidewalks and whatever. You know, we needed cops and cars, and it was an amazing job that Bonnie and his team did. Everyone was very, very impressed with that.
And then just probably the last question I have is the Brute house. That exterior seemed really specific. How did you guys find that house?
You know, originally it was scheduled for this one area outside of Fort Lauderdale. And obviously we couldn't do Texas, New Orleans, and Fort Lauderdale. So my thing was, what if we kind of made it more like the Redneck Riviera? You know, so it's a house on stilts kind of feel. So he's still on a journey towards Florida, but he maybe doesn't get all the way there, or because he flies out of Miami. And the funny story is that house was a dear friend of mine who I met while I was doing Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and he had sold it a couple of years earlier. But that's just the one I thought in that little stretch on Bayou Sauvage could work perfectly to set a statement. As soon as we rolled up on it, David immediately goes, all right, so chain link fence here. He was already picturing exactly how it was going to be 9 months out of when we actually shot it. I mean, the drag there was when we shot it, which was in January. It was so foggy on the first night that we just called it and couldn't shoot it. And it took 4 days instead of 2.5, to be honest with you, because it was right next to the bayou and it was a winter in New Orleans. And that was part of the tonal thing we wanted anyways. We wanted Paris to feel, in the day, it's got a bit of a grayness to it based on the granite and everything else that composes it. And then you land in the DR and it's just a green bomb has gone off around you. And then when you're in that whole area of New Orleans, it's winter New Orleans, where even the bayous don't have, the cypresses don't have leaves on them. They're not really cypresses, not evergreens. And then in Chicago, where it's just, cold as hell, where that's real breath coming out of those guys, because it was 8 degrees when we shot that sequence going to the restaurant. So it was a lot of fun. We were definitely all over the place, and it took a whole team, but it really rests on a guy who has a real vision. So if you're doing that much stuff, somebody telling you exactly what he needs, exactly where and how, makes it a lot easier for sure.
All right, Bill, Rosita, thank you so much for your story. Sadly, we must move on. JJ is going to talk a little bit about The Fall Guy.
Well, welcome, Lisa Scope. So, incredible film if you guys haven't seen it. Really, really fun. Like just a lot of fun, and the stunts are just mind-blowing. So Sydney's stunning waterways and iconic landmarks play starring roles in The Fall Guy. The love story and murder mystery unfold against the backdrop of Sydney Harbor and its beaches, where the beauty of the coastal city contrasts with the film's darker elements. The iconic shapes of the Opera House and the Harbor Bridge provide a striking setting for the post-apocalyptic scenes. a spectacular car crash on the sandy dunes of Cornell, a breathtaking stunt at #1 Bly Street, and a high-speed chase through the harbor all contribute to the film's dynamic narrative, with each location enhancing the drama and the romance. And Lisa worked on this with Philip Roop, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Lisa, this film, I mean, Opera House, iconic location. Obviously it's been shot before, but you guys had this, I'll just jump right in. You guys had this spectacular boat chase in the harbor right there. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe you have something in the that you can share. I don't remember what you posted exactly about pulling off that boat chase in the harbor and what along with the bridge. Like, maybe let's just jump into that. I'll let you go.
Okay, so Jones Bay Wharf is where Ryder's apartment was, which is where the whole boat chase starts, and that was the work of Daniela Watson and Simon Marshall, locking down that whole section. And it was shot across probably about 5 or 6 nights. So they started at Jones Bay Wharf, and I don't have any of the maps. I didn't pull them out for the start to the finish. But basically, we went from Jones Bay Wharf to Walsh Bay. Then we came around to Farm Cove and also to Rushcutters Bay. So it was shot in about 5 different sections of the harbour. And each of those sections of the harbour we had to fully lock down. And that's quite a mission to do when it's such a big city. And, you know, people pay a lot of money in the city to live in those apartments near Jones Bay. So the whole explosion at Farm Cove, that was great cooperation from the maritime team. They're very experienced at dealing with events on the harbour and just cooperated the whole way. We managed to do a test before we did the film, so the test went really well and everyone was very happy with it. We also had the complications of having the Moonlight Cinema on at the same time, so we had to hold back doing that fight, doing the chase and the explosion until after the cinema had finished. So I have got a map on what the Opera House was like, because whilst the Opera House has been used before for filming, it hasn't actually been used to this scale. So, you know, usually when you go to the Opera House, it's a smaller scale event. And when we've filmed at the Opera House before, we usually film at the house and, you know, in the forecourt area, and it's literally quite a small footprint that you have. But we took over the Botanic Gardens and also made it all an exclusion zone because we didn't want people obviously walking in our area. So we had, which is this shot here which is in the Botanic Gardens. So we had a whole exclusion zone where we were able to have the stunts and catering, and our unit base was up in the Botanic Gardens as well. So we were able to go from there down to the Opera House itself. So we had crew parking down in the city, and yeah, we went to 1 Bly Street afterwards.
So that, I mean, and also like just locking up. Well, first of all, do you have a picture of 1 Bly Street? Because that building is like phenomenal. And if you guys, in the opening of the film, it starts with this amazing stunt in that building. And Lisa, did you happen to have a picture of the
yeah, I pulled up a picture of the atrium.
Interior.
Yeah. Yep, I'll get that for you. So this building is actually where our Prime Minister is, and it's owned by a company called Dexus, and they actually are so film friendly. They have a film person that deals with filming for all of their properties, so they were very open to it. But on this floor, this is level 12 and that's level 15, and on this floor here we had a whole pod that we need to remove, a whole workstation, so that the stunt team could build the rig for Ryan to fall from. And there's a platform here which we had to remove all the furniture there too, and Ryan stepped out from there and dropped down. So it's a beautiful building, and we locked down the whole street and the whole block so that we could do the one from the street leading into the building, going up into the lift, and then walking out and dropping. So it was good.
It's such an amazing opening, and it's super, super cool. And also, Lisa, how long, like filming on the bridge, how was that permitting? I mean, is that bridge used to shutting down, and how did you do that sequence?
So it took us 8 months to negotiate with Transport for New South Wales. They shut down the Harbour Bridge more for events that are community based. So they will shut it down for like a city to surf, or you know, a protest or a memorial kind of walk, but nothing for filming. Filming's allowed on the bridge, but we tend to do rolling blocks for car commercials on the bridge, and the time frame that you're allowed to do that is between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday. So what we were pitching to them to shut down the bridge was not done before. So we did a Zoom with all the correct people that needed to give us permission. So we had the assets team, the security team, a lot of the like executives that are the ones that are responsible for signing off on a Zoom with Chris O'Hara pitching the stunt. Because at first we wanted to bring in a helicopter, drop Colt down onto the top of the roof, and then he would jump onto the deck of the bridge or parachute off. And there were a few different scenarios that we were pitching to them, and having a whole Zoom team of people shaking their head was quite unnerving, actually. So we tried to pitch other things and thinking like, so if we were to drive across the bridge, what would that look like? What would you actually allow to do? What are the parameters of, what are your concerns? What do we need to think of? And most of the problems that they were worried about was copycats. So, you know, people that do all these TikTok videos and then they go and copy it, because they do have issues on the roads with people going into the tunnels and copycatting other, you know, but we did finally win them around with Impossible, Implausible Fantasy. Words of Philip Roop.
I've always find that, like, once you keep working on those people, after a while, they're just like, oh, forget it. We'll just shut it down. Like, they just, you know, they finally sort of give up and go, yeah, none of all these scenarios sound so complicated. Let's forget it. We'll just shut it down. It'll just, you know, that'll be easier in the end.
Yeah, what we really needed to do to start off with actually needed probably a full day to do it, but there was no way they were going to do that for us. So we had to adapt what we were pitching to them to fit into that sort of 4-hour daylight window. So that's a testament to the stunt team that were just able to adapt and make things work with, you know, really tight limitations.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, like, on a big scheme, I have probably 2 more questions for you. This is one of them. On a big scheme, you know, because the show is based on the original Fall Guy, did the stakes feel like crazy high on this one? Like, it seems like they were crazy high of what you guys had to accomplish everywhere.
Yeah, I think because of the size of the stunts, it was crazy high, but I never really felt like I knew the original series. I watched it when I was a kid, but it was more about a contemporary version of it that was quite exciting and so we haven't done anything like this scale in Sydney before, especially Sydney for Sydney, which was, you know, such a great opportunity to be able to do first, and working through all of those like this, or working through all the stunts with the stunt team, with all the rehearsals they had to do, and it was really great fun.
And how, speaking of the stunts, so the finale, which is that incredible car jump scene, where was that shot, and how long, like, what was the process of that, and how long what was that location, and how long did you have to keep total control of that?
We were on the site. It's an old quarry, so it they've got a section of land that they have backfilled, and we've been using it as a bit of a backlot for a little while. We were really lucky to come in on the back of Furiosa. So Furiosa had had it for 8 months the year before, and then we came in on the back of that, and we were there for probably another 6 to 8 months. And so the owner of the property was very used to having filming and very cooperative. They built all of the the like the ravine and the mountains or the sand dunes around, so that they had total control and were very cooperative. And it's the only beach in Sydney that you can actually drive a vehicle on. So, and they know that, and they use that to their advantage, I guess. But they were very cooperative and very mindful of the environment. So we had to be careful about, anything that came off the car, the whole, what happens with the petrol, what happens with all the little shards of that comes off the car. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And Stevie Nelson has a question that came in through the chat, which is, was the Fall Guy not originally written for Australia, and did you have to adapt, or do you know?
Yeah, so it was originally written for Berlin, and it took so Philip Roop and David Watts did a lot of the really early scouting with David Leitch and David Schooneman around Sydney. And I think as they spent a lot of time doing all the scouting looking for Berlin, they realized that Sydney's so beautiful and it would be a great place to set it. So, yeah.
I think now we will move on to Sasha, back to Sasha with Civil War. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Jen.
much, Lisa.
With Civil War, we've got a Civil War-torn future America and a team of military-embedded journalists racing to reach the nation's capital before rebel factions storm the White House. Georgia's diverse terrain plays a pivotal role in their cross-country journey, each location a character in its own right. Chattahoochee Hills offers dense woodlands and open fields that reflect the uncertainty and danger of their mission. Downtown Atlanta's urban sprawl embodies the chaos and destruction of war, while the imposing granite domes of Stone Mountain symbolize the monumental challenges they face. Emory University in Briarcliff transforms into a brief haven of intellectual refuge amidst the turmoil. The UN refugee camp constructed in Alonzo Herndon Stadium provides a stark contrast, highlighting the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the background of their perilous trek. So joining us today, we have Kelly Morrison and Melissa Mortensen. Ladies, thank you both so much for being with us. Perhaps you can tell us what were your individual roles on this project were.
Hi, we're really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much. I served as the location manager for the project, and Melissa Mortensen scouted early on the project and also was one of the key assistant managers on the filming shoot.
And we are, in this film, we're on the road. There's gunfire galore. There's a siege of the White House. Where did filming actually take place? Like, what were your major locations here?
The story starts in New York. So we were tasked with cheating the Georgia topography for a circuitous road trip from New York to Washington, D.C. in the story. We shot a great deal of work at Chattahoochee Hills Eventing. It is an equestrian site, just under 8,000 acres, I believe. And we built our military camp there. We built our mass grave site was there. We did a lot of driving in South Fulton and Chattahoochee Hills. So we basically worked in downtown Atlanta. We cheated downtown Atlanta for Brooklyn, New York. We were on Jesse Hill there for the water distribution site with the suicide bomber, and we worked on several highways south of Atlanta, also inside Atlanta and outside.
Okay. And at the beginning of the film, we have that big protest scene with, there's tons of BG, there's a suicide bomber, and a big explosion. So what sort of went into setting that up as far as, getting control over that large space and, making sure that the public was aware, I guess?
Well, we worked with extensively with Atlanta PD. We have a police coordinator for all shoots here, and with the City of Atlanta Film Commission, with the Neighborhood Association, and Isolated, tried to do our best to select a block that visually met Alex Garland's needs in terms of being in Brooklyn, New York, and also was controllable. We were on Jesse Hill. Basically, it's not a long block, but we cordoned off and controlled an H factor in terms of streets. We notified extensively, and there were rehearsals, and it went very well. We had a very positive response.
How far in advance do you have to notify for something like of that scale?
Well, we tend to have all locations are assigned to a key assistant manager, and they're assigned in a way that no one has back-to-back locations, and they will have an assistant manager also assigned. This was 2 months in advance, talking with certainly the locations that we impact immediately on the block, but also notifying in advance the requests that we're going to be looking for, dates that we don't interrupt in a way, in terms of having more people on the street and we get some kind of a 911 response. So we started that a couple of months in advance.
And what about we're on the road so much in this film, and there's a mix of, kind of desolate 2-lane highways, big freeways that have, abandoned cars everywhere. Where were these shot? How did you pick them? What went into all of that?
For the piece that was scripted to be on the Van Wyck in New York, originally our story picked up at the airport, and the car made its way into the city. I think that did not fall into the final cut, but we shot on the Buford Spring Connector in Atlanta. They'll give you a 9 to 3 between rush hours with a pacing unit in place. So you have an extensive police presence to provide a safe buffer for the team and for the unit that's traveling on the highway. The piece of highway where we had abandoned cars was a spur in Hampton, Georgia, that they will allow you to close a piece to, it's just over a mile. So they do allow you to close for prep. We kept it for 3 days, prep, shoot, wrap. And it's not an extensive lockup in terms of, we do have a large police presence for that closure, but it really did afford a lot of latitude for the creative and producing team in terms of doing what we were going to do on the street and then handing it over to Frame Store for visual effects.
Okay. Maybe Melissa can tell us a little bit about what locations were assigned to you, any particular challenges you were facing, anything that was like really fun to shoot.
I mean, I think the fire scene was the biggest one for me. I'm, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello. Hi.
No, asking to put a fire in a forest was one of my biggest challenges. So that was interesting.
So who
because
was the person you were working with for that?
Well, I work with Kelly, but I had all the driving stuff with the gas station, the car wash scene. Chat Hills was my world mostly, but the fire scene was honestly like when I went to the local fire station, I'm like, well, I need to set fire. And we did. That scene was incredible, but very scary. But that was a harrowing moment and one of the most memorable. But and also landing all those helicopters, everything that we did for that massive scene out at Chat Hills. That was my world for a couple months. With the fire, and we didn't burn anything down, but it was that was incredibly memorable.
So what goes into setting something like that up? Because normally, you know, setting a forest on fire is a big no in our locations world, but obviously you were able to sort of, you know, get that piece of
Well, they kind of love us down there, and special effects laid in elements. And we had a lot of fire presence to do that stretch of road, and it was incredible. And we just had the safety and all the protocols and everybody involved, and they were very happy to help us with that. And I think it looked brilliant. So,
And before we move on to our next folks, the White House, that was probably shot in different pieces, right? Because there's the White House, there's like leading up to it with Pennsylvania Avenue. How did that get accomplished and what was where?
I will defer to Kelly because that was shot here. But Kelly,
Well, the White House, some of the exterior and some of most of the interior was shot at the White House set that Tyler Perry Studios has here in Atlanta. It's about 85% to scale. It's a remarkable asset for people coming in to do some work that involves the White House. We did take a piece of it, a piece of the gunfight inside the White House. We did put that on a stage build here in Atlanta due to the squibs, and making sure that we handed the location back as pristine as we received it. In terms of the advance to the White House, that environment was created in a parking lot at Stone Mountain Park here in Atlanta. They have a very large lot that's off the beaten path. The design team, the production designer, and her team built the first floor of that commercial environment, the street and the buildings, and Framestore came in and put in everything above the first floor. We were originally scouting some areas in the city, some of the wider streets, to cheat for that. But with the gunfire that we utilized, the sound and the disruption in a midtown environment, the lot just was much more palatable for that work.
Kelly, Melissa, thank you both so much for joining us. We're going to move on to our next panelists. We're going to chat with the folks from Fargo. So with Fargo season 5, we are set in Minnesota and North Dakota with the wide, desolate plains and farmland and the opulent Lion Estate and the residential Minnesotan streets and homes, all filmed within approximately 45 minutes of Calgary, Alberta. Instantly recognizable and dynamic spaces encompass the mythical, the soulful, and the bizarre as a seemingly typical Midwestern housewife is plunged back into a life she thought she had left behind. The Tillman Ranch exudes utility and the ultra-conservative values of an abusive spouse, while an Easter Seals camp plays for Camp Utopia, a surreal safe haven nestled in a protective curtain of pine trees where she can face her trauma and learn how to fight back. Joining us today, we have Mohammed Mo Kazaz and Luke Antosh. Gentlemen, hello. Thank you for being with us here today. Can you tell us about who did what? Did you guys do evens and odds on this? You were both, tell me.
Yeah, so evens and odds. We block shot 2 episodes at a time, and I started as the odd block location manager, and we kind of went back and forth a little bit. We had a few recurring locations between our 2 teams, and you know, the communication was always there, and the conversation was always open. Yeah.
And
I'm just gonna throw out there that I was the even block location manager, so really I just rode Mo's coattails because he was the actual hard worker doing the 1st, 3rd, and 5th block, while I nestled in there and got to hog all the glory while he did all the work. So just to be,
And then I did the same
upfront
when I
about
came
that.
back afterwards. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we got a good circuitous rhythm going, don't we? Yeah, totally.
you have a mutual riding of coattails then, just for setting each other up for success.
Circles and circles.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with some of the places you were filming in, in Minnesota, North Dakota, or scripted as such, and in Calgary, we've got a bunch of desolate, middle of nowhere places that in theory might seem like they're really easy to film, but are they? And how far away were they from sort of like your home base and any, built sets? And what did that end up like? What did your days look like?
Um, so for the most part, we kind of didn't really have um like a backlot per se, or like when in Calgary, typically what we do is it's usually a combination, build on location kind of thing. And it goes hand in hand kind of with like our work goes hand in hand with the production designer and the art department basically. So um things that were too specific, or things that had that were very impactful, we would find a location to build that, like the filling station. This for example was one of our first sets that we started working on, our first locations. We needed a gas station kind of in the middle of nowhere, really, on a highway. So this was an abandoned sort of airstrip, or like a very old regional airport. And what we ended up doing is this is what it looked like before. It had the structure, it had the space, the tarmac was all ripped up. So we ended up, adding some elements to it to make it look like an interstate highway kind of thing between the two states. And this was the gas station that was built. So this is our version of kind of this was our backlot or our studio for a couple of weeks during filming.
At least for my particular episodes, we shoot away from some builds with the exception of, and I don't have any fancy photos. Oh, all right, there I am with the director, Sylvain White, with our matching coats. I'll tell that story another time. But yeah, what I wound up kind of running into in terms of the biggest build for us in any episode that I was kind of middlemaning was we have an old Greyhound station in Calgary, and I don't know about everyone else's jurisdiction, but medical care can be very difficult to find and film, right? At least here in Alberta. And so to find a creative solution for a hospital, we were able to get to this city-owned old Greyhound station because it's all about finding the hallways that could work. And that in of itself was quite an effort, especially because at the time I had COVID. So I was stuck in my basement while trying to get our entire team into these places, which were being handled by, our wonderful municipality, but our municipality that sometimes has, certain days off on vacation and no one to call after. So keeping that long story very, very short comparatively. Where that was our biggest kind of build location that we were able to produce with the beautiful marriage that can be the location and the build.
So I heard a rumor that you guys had an interesting game that you all played with the crew to sort of keep them on the straight and narrow and on their toes. And I think you have some photos to show us too, was it Jeopardy? It was a version of Jeopardy?
Well, I'll speak to that. This was block 4, and any of us fellow location folk can know that if you're going to a return location in a series, sometimes it can get a little, let's call it, you kind of find yourself asking or answering the same questions again and again. So for one particular logistics meeting, I opted to create a game of Jeopardy to make it a little more interesting, because there's always a lot of the same questions. In fact, you know what? To be frank, Sasha, JJ, Mo, and we're not going to play a whole game or anything like that. Each of you gets one, but we had driving on grass without talking to locations because we had a lot of native grass to worry about, altering the landscape in any way, assuming the location could be treated like a backlot, which would be ideal and preferable, but here we are. The amount of time it takes, the amount of work it takes Luke to accomplish what you would think is a basic and easy task, and finally, why choose this location? And by the way, this is all for the Tillman Ranch in in Fargo season 5 there. So you know what, Sasha, you're up. Give me one.
Oh boy, I will take driving on grass without talking to locations for 300.
Okay. We'll have to ask, what is the question?
May I drive on the grass?
Can we pop big old condor off the road? Ah, very close. Sorry, Sasha. Sorry. Okay. Now let's carry on here. JJ, let's get a one from you.
I will take why choose this location for 500?
I don't know. I just work here. What is the question?
Why did we pick this location?
Hey, you know what? Close enough. You get 500 right there. Now let's see, Mo. You can end this with a tie, or less than a tie, whatever you want, Mo.
I'm seriously
will
use this on every show. Sorry, I had to interrupt.
Yeah, it's all yours. It's the
Feeling
easiest thing you can find. I just need the music. That's the only thing.
I'll do altering landscape in any way for 500.
Okay. And by the way, you know what? We'll do a tiebreaker if we have to on this. Not with this short notice. The question, sir.
Can we chop down this tree?
Ooh, can I dig a hole here? You are so close, but thank you for playing. All three of you did a wonderful job, and I assure you, there is an actual thing for every single one of these. You know, just for fun, I'm just going to say the amount of work it takes Luke to accomplish what you think was a basic and easy task for 500. The reason I drink, the Tillman Ranch. Hey, so that was my way of really trying to communicate to everyone on our fine Block 4 logistics meeting how to work with a location that we should have already known the rules for. So again, there is a link out there. I'm happy to send out at some point. A couple of them are babbling and incoherent because that's what happens when you think of a fun game about 2 minutes before your Zoom-based logistics meeting.
Just going to, I see Stevie asked about the neighborhood where Dot and Lion's house became a set. That was very tricky for us, and that took us like a few months to kind of figure out as we started the show. Basically, the Lion house was very specific. Like it had very specific action. There was a fire scene. And we looked for dozens and dozens and dozens of houses, and they just like the layout didn't fit or something was wrong with the exterior. So finally, instead of looking for a house, we decided to look for a street, like a nice street with trees, and try to find an empty plot of land. And we found this, and building a set in a very impressive neighborhood with very you know it's something temporary with the city. We had to go through a lot, and by the end this was kind of the final product. This was all completely empty inside, and this became Lion and Wayne, Wayne and Dot's house basically. I started the process, and then I think Luke had the big portion of dealing with the logistics around this, because I think first episode we only shot for a couple of days, but then the meat and potatoes was when Halloween became a thing, and Luke had to make sure all the neighbors were talked to, and everyone was kind of on board. So as you can see, like these houses are pretty affluential, or very like it's a rich neighborhood. It's one of the richest neighborhoods kind of in Calgary, and talking to them and trying to be mindful and respectful and asking them, hey, just so you know, can we park trucks and can we have people at all hours of the night? That was a big challenge, wouldn't you say, Luke?
Well, burning a house down. Yes, absolutely. And another great thing about this neighborhood is it was a very affluent neighborhood full of lawyers. I've if anyone's playing location manager bingo, if you've got injunction threatened against you to stop filming in your in your little box there bingo board, just you can click it in my honor if you like. No, this was a very solid effort and a very good example of the importance of staffing accordingly on any of our shows, because we had a team of 2 people going around to these about 80 plus homes, getting people on board, getting them aware of everything, and offering hotels if they needed hotels, which I don't think a single person took up the offer of a hotel, which is impressive because, again, we were burning a house down in the middle of the night in their neighborhood on a Thursday before they went to work on Friday. But maybe it was a good excuse not to work on Friday. What do I know? I'm not them, nor do I have that much money to live in that neighborhood. So, hey, that's okay.
So something that I heard was pretty important was kind of understanding the environment and the landscape with which you were working, and native grass is something that has come up a lot. Mo, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
What was interesting, this wasn't necessarily like this wasn't technically a Western show, but it wasn't a city show either. But it had like elements from all sort of environments. So in one day, you'd go from working with the city of Calgary to talking to ranchers and farmers. There's a very you need to have understanding and sensitivity to what's important to each person that you're dealing with. Native grass in our province is pretty important. It's a strain of grass that has existed as forever, basically. It's never been seeded, never been treated with any chemicals, and it's like the natural grass that was here on the land. And when damaged, if it gets damaged, it's very difficult to recultivate. You can't, there's no seeds for it, basically. So farmers and ranches with this kind of grass, just as an example, they take care of it, and it's good for grazing cattle and stuff. So as you're working in these environments, as you're talking to farmers and ranchers, you have to have this knowledge, you have to have this understanding before you get to the person, before you start the conversation. And of course, we're not the most sensitive industry to this, as Luke showed, like as you showed us on your Jeopardy. A condor needs to go somewhere off the grass. It just needs to happen. They can't live without it. So then it becomes a game. You're trying to balance it out with the homeowner or the landowner, and you're trying to reach a solution that is good for everyone. And it's a juggle, and it's management basically, and that's kind of what we do. It's interesting, how do you measure the damage? Like, how do you, well, I think what we ended up doing specifically for the native grass issue was just defining, our footprint very precisely, monitoring that, being very on top of it and respectful. And I know Luke had his fair share of dealings with that as well.
Yeah, and I can say that in the end, the true reclaimer is a check with a release. Really was what in the end of it. We did great overall, no question about it. But yeah, it's I can't remember if it was a buffalo fescue grass or something like that. It's an interesting thing. Again, a lot of us understand we have to become sudden budget experts on everything around us, and I suddenly had to become a budget biologist who understood the finer points of grass, without having to just text the greens guy while I'm mid-sentence to try and find out what I'm doing.
And another sort of like natural location that you guys had was Camp Utopia, and you've got a lot of different places in there. So how did you find that particular one? I think you guys went through a lot of possibilities before you landed on that. Luke, I think that one was yours.
Yeah, I want to say that's episode 8 of the show. It might have been 7, but hey, no need to mince that. That was interesting because, if I recall correctly, the early drafts of the script actually called for less of a camp and more of a town. And if anyone's seen the show, it's like a very dreamlike sequence. I think it actually ends up being maybe a dream. Who knows? But one of the things about that was when it became a camp, we had to find a camp. And here in Alberta, if anyone's familiar, we got beautiful trees, mountains, everything. It was really something that traditionally should have been relatively simple for us to work at, but it actually wound up being a little more complex. And a lot of the options being presented, at least photographically, were not quite selling. But Easter Seals Camp Horizon, just west of small town Bray Creek, west of Alberta, ended up being an option that was very, it was without question in my mind, my very small mind comparative to the big minds I get to work with, was this is the one, right? But how do we sell it? And thankfully, our designer, a gentleman named Trevor Smith, who's I think up for an Emmy for the show, so fingers crossed for him. The two of us were of one mind in this, wherein it's like, okay, we need to go and we need to really try and sell this. So both of us took an unpaid Saturday to go out there ourselves and, you know, rephotograph and really kind of finesse things into an incredible pitch package, which thankfully for us, our schedule, our budget, and all the good stuff that really dictates our lives, the pitch sold. It ended with us doing a visit with our key creative, and you know, it ended with a big thumbs up. So that was a big victory, because you know that was of our, I want to say, approximately 21 day for the block shoot. That was, I want to say, about 9 or 10 of those days. So that let me take a few breaths in between finding other locations to mess with.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for your time and for bringing locations jeopardy into our lives, which I know many people on the call are going to feel, myself included. And with that, we're going to take it back over to JJ for Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we have with us Ryan Ferguson, location manager, Ross Broder, location manager, and Elisabetta Tommaso, who was working in Italy. A feature in a TV series. It is pretty incredible, all of the areas that this show went to. From the bustling streets of New York to picturesque Italian towns, secret agents posing as a married couple navigate their double lives and a complex relationship. Rarely filmed city streets, an old mall under the Manhattan Bridge, and a Brooklyn rooftop that looks down at an open air but below street level subway line propel their dangerous and unpredictable missions. In Italy, a foot chase in an old town on Lake Como is inspired by its natural maze of alleys, steps, and courtyards. An action sequence on a rooftop bar at the top of a mountain showcases the snow-capped Italian Dolomites, and gorgeous landscapes contrast with the violence and mirror the dual nature of the lives of the main characters. I'd like to actually start with Elisabetta. You've been nominated previously for an LMGI award, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, for House
I received gratefully an LMGI award for House of Gucci 2 years ago. Yeah,
fantastic.
Which I'm very proud of.
So tell us, so you, I guess, Elisabetta, were responsible for this whole incredible sequence in Lake Como, which included an amazing car chase as well as all of the use of this ski resort. Can you tell us a bit about that? I'll let you just jump in.
So basically, we shot 2 episodes in Italy, one on Lake Como, the other one was up in the Dolomites. So the request was to find locations that were internationally renowned and recognized, easily recognizable. So, of course, everybody knows Lake Como, and all these locations have had to be exclusive, because that was the nature of the role that John and Jane had. And, you know, there were spies, and there were, going all over the place on these crazy missions. So the locations had to be incredibly specific and exclusive. So yes, on Lake Como, we shot a really long foot chase in a tiny town called Argenio. And basically, we literally put the entire town on the contract, whether it was for having somebody hanging from the window, or using a doorway, or changing a window, or anything that we literally knocked on every door and had the entire town working with us. And luckily, I mean, this was an off-season time, so it was easier to achieve. But I think we pulled over, I think, between 250 and 300 contracts just for the town of Argenio in itself. We also, the fun part of this, and also the crazy part of this, is that these towns have got very, very tiny parking spaces. And of course, we move with 40 trucks and a million minivans, and, you know, we have 300 people crew. And so we had to share the only parking area that was available with the local church, the religious processions, the weekly market. So there was a lot of trying to find, really, to fit in the schedule, the normal life of small towns that are connected by one road only. So there was a lot of logistics involved in this, transporting equipment when we couldn't do it on wheels, we had to do it on boats. So it took quite some time and some scheduling. Also, we had a car chase, which was meant to be, it actually was taken on a road just above Argenio, because you have these beautiful views of the lake from there. It was meant to be only a couple of days. It ended up being 7. So for 7 consecutive days, we had to ITC a section of this road. There was a lot of talks with the authorities, and we had selective times of day when we could do what we had to do. And this was the reason it took so long, is because in the sequence, there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of stuff happening in the car. So it took some time also for the director and the stunt supervisor to figure out all the action and how was best to achieve it. The other thing is that we shot on Lake Como the sequence in a cottage. Right at the end, at some point, we blow up a cottage. We had to look for a cottage that was accessible only by boat, and it was incredibly cozy and romantic looking, which was a contrast with all the action and the darkness of the episode. And so we really found this, what it's called is, its real name, it's the Writer's Nest, and it's owned by a writer who lives on Lake Como, that built this little nest inside a cove, and the interiors are made of wood and just books everywhere and big glass windows, and it's the most romantic place ever. And we blow it up, of course, like we like doing. So but
really is only
we had a bit of bad weather.
Sorry, it really is accessible.
Beg your pardon?
It really is accessible
Only by boat.
So that meant
By boat,
yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what that took to film there, and what, you know,
so basically there's a tiny town sort of 5 minutes boat away from the actual cottage called Faggetolario, and that was our base. And then there was a garden around the cottage, and it was complicated because that was the only place for the crew to stand by. So there was a lot of backwards and forwards, a lot of preparation before we were actually able to shoot. And we shot a full, my light going again, a full week in the cottage. But the difficulty was the weather, because it started raining, and so there was a lot of mud, and you know, it's complicated when you have crews standing by outside, you know, and because we're shooting inside, and this cottage was entirely made of huge glass windows, so reflections were everywhere. So, but in the end, you know, we managed to. It took a lot of scheduling. You have to do things in a certain way when you're working on the water, as much as up on the Dolomites on snow. you have to be very precise with the scheduling, the type of vehicles you use, how many people can be on each vehicle or boat, what can you and can you not bring. And of course, you know, as we all know nowadays, we like to have all our tools, all our toys right next to us. And, you know, everybody is essential on set, even when we ask for a reduced crew. So, you know, of course, we try to help everybody out, but it you know, it took some time, but eventually, you know, like with children, you know, you
Yeah.
put them all together and you manage to achieve what you need to achieve. So and I mean, the landscape is just stunning.
Yeah. Can you talk about the Dolomites and
So
what ski resort was that?
yeah. So I read quite a few articles that all said that we shot in the town of Colfush, like it's spelled on many articles. But actually, the area we shot is an area called Alta Badia, which is in a region called Trentino Alto Adige, right up north. And that's it's a giant ski resort. Basically, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's a giant ski resort that has over 1,200 kilometers of ski slopes that are all interconnected to each other. So you can literally go out in the morning and just move from ski slopes from ski slope to ski slope just by ski lifting and skiing. The beautiful thing about this area is that it's dotted with these tiny villages that are gorgeous. Like, you know, you couldn't ask for a better place because they'll you know, they all have beautiful wood houses, and they're all hand painted, and the nature around it, you know, there's beautiful woods, and just the peaks are incredible. And we were very lucky because it started snowing early, sort of mid-November. Well, I think it was actually, yeah, it was, yeah, probably no, more the beginning of November to mid-November. It started snowing. But the thing is that when the resorts are open, it's pretty impossible to shoot in these areas because the amount of tourists and public that's around is just, you can't wrangle them and work there. But what we found out that shooting in these areas the 2-3 weeks before all the resorts open, it's even worse because that's when they prepare all the slopes, and they take this very seriously. You know, they pump snow night and day, and they have these giant plowers where they literally run the slopes up and down many times. So you have a lot of safety issues that you have to, and regulations that you have to comply with. Now, luckily, a few months earlier, they shot a movie, a Netflix movie in Balsanales, which is about 3-4 hours nearby. And so we managed to hire the same mountain safety team that worked on that movie to work with us. And again, we had to schedule how we would take the equipment up on the high peaks. So in the end, we decided to use helicopters because that was the quickest and most cost-effective way of bringing heavy equipment. And but again, and we had these special slates being made that were towed with snowcats to bring all the rest that we could run on the slopes. But it takes a lot of scheduling because it's, you know, at 4 o'clock in the morning when you sort of opening your set, it's minus 20 degrees Celsius, which minus 20 Celsius, which I'm not sure what it is in degrees, but it's very, very cold, I can assure you. And you have to move extremely carefully on ice because, you know, accidents can occur, and it is very slippery. Moving from one place to another by car, it is complicated. And but you know, the point is that when you're up there at 6 a.m., it's so stunning. I mean, you're on the rooftop of the world, and it's beautiful and stunning, and you know, You can't get enough everywhere.
Tell us how you divided up the duties on this show.
Well, I had two assistant location managers and like 5 or 6 assistants. It was a decent sized crew. And we shot 2 episodes at a time. So we were leapfrogging, I think we ended up shooting 9 episodes. We shot 5.5 in New York. There was the 2 in Italy, and then there was half of one that I think was shot in Mexico. So we shot half, the lead up, and then they went to Mexico and shot the other half of that episode.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even realize that I guess I don't know. I didn't remember that part.
I think it's episode
there was
4.
so much.
They
There's
get on
just
helicopters and then I think it's I don't think it's Mexico in the story, but that's where they shot it.
okay, got it. Well, okay, so you shot at some really cool spots in New York, including the High Line, which for those of you, well, actually, Ryan, why don't you tell us what the High Line is for those of us in New York?
The High Line is a disused elevated railway station, that used to, in the good old days, bring rail cars from the piers, would come up and bring it into the factories. It's been out of use for many years, and in the last 10 or so years, the city finally rehabbed it and turned it into a park. So it's an elevated park built on a railway station. Some of the tracks snake through buildings that used to be factory buildings that took those deliveries. So it's a pretty interesting use of the space. For the city, it's beautiful. It's like 3 miles or something total length, along the west side of Manhattan.
And I would imagine it's packed with people all the time. Like,
Yes.
so
I
how
mean,
did you shoot there?
all times of day. Well, generally the High Line only they only allow filming it closes at like 9 p.m. So you're allowed to shoot at night when it's closed to the public. And if you shoot during the day, it's like a handheld package only is what they generally is their usual rule, that you can come up and then you have to shoot with the people and kind of work around it. We got into a very long conversation with them about how this wasn't going to work for us when we got this, a lot of conversations with the city, and they didn't give us exclusivity, but they were able to close off sections at a time in a much larger way to give us a lot more control. In that sequence, we started out the original scripted plan was for Donald Glover to jump off the High Line in that sequence, and because of copycats, the city was really against that. There's an art piece called The Vessel that's at the far end of the High Line, which had a bunch of suicides, and so they were just not okay with the idea of people jumping off the High Line because of that already problem that the city already has. So we ended up, running around, and they end up going down the steps because, but that was the city's one, like, all right, we're going to give you some exclusive use of the space, but you can't jump off the
That copycat thing is real, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
as Lisa was talking to us about. And then you guys you had also one of the things that fascinated me was this sort of amazing foot chase. Well, God, so many things. Okay, this amazing foot chase where the two characters, so as I'm gonna give you guys a spoiler alert now, so cover your ears if you don't want to hear this, but as the series sort of starts to come to a close, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are at each other, this couple that has been paired together randomly, fall in love, and and then are essentially set out to murder each other towards the end. They have this amazing foot chase where they literally like look to the side and see each other and then just, start racing after each other. How that seemed like it encompassed a huge territory. And how did you guys pull that off?
Yeah, so that entire sequence, it starts at the Whitney and then goes on to the High Line. The Whitney Museum, which is actually right at the entrance, like the far end of the High Line. So they start in the Whitney, they come out of the Whitney, they go onto the High Line, they go a few blocks on the High Line, then they come down. And then the house that is the Smith House is in the West Village, which is the next neighborhood over. So we basically used mostly the real direction, is, you know, we were actually running towards where the actual house is.
Mhm.
And you know, it was a lot of, it's all the meatpacking district. What worked in our favor is, since COVID, they started these open streets programs, which most of the time is a pain in the ass, but where certain organizations can close off a street and like turn it into like a public walkway. That was a COVID thing. Uh, a lot of neighborhoods still have those closed off streets. So you're able to work with whoever has the permit for that closed street and say, hey, you're not doing, can we come on this day? And because you already have the street closed, use your closed street. So it was part of that. We were negotiating with different entities that had street closures already in place, and then just closing off other streets with the city to, you know, all right, we need to get from this spot to this spot. And you know, a lot of that is just figuring out time of day and traffic patterns to say, okay, we can get the shot, we can hold the traffic for an hour here or 2 hours here, you know, depending on traffic. And that always becomes the problem with the DP when you're arguing traffic patterns and they care about where the sun is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, right, exactly. Can you
So-
can you reorient the street so that yeah, right.
yeah.
I wish I could do that. So, if
Yeah.
I could do that, I could do like this and get $1 million or more.
Yeah.
What should we cover? We've got probably time for one and 1.2 more questions. So should we, I know you said the most complicated location was the one that we never saw.
Oh yeah. Episode 6, which was a recut. I think Ross had to go. But he handled the reshoots. That episode was originally entirely in the woods, and the episode that aired is not. So we ended up in a state park up in for like 3 weeks. And what I just say is, I'm sure a lot of you guys are used to working in natural environments, but New York City crews are not. So you take a bunch of city kids into the woods for 3 weeks and they are not happy. So
I just think it's so funny that the hardest scene is the one that is we're never gonna see.
yeah, oh yeah. We spent 3 weeks. I mean, we were able to work with the park, and we got an area where we, you know, we built out a tent city and a base camp, but then all the shooting locations were off of trails. So it was just basically hand carrying all the equipment into the woods. You couldn't get a truck in, you couldn't get, like, they were picking locations. It's like, okay, it's going to take us an hour just to carry the gear to the site. And then we can start shooting. And then we
Yeah.
could set up. And we hired these tree climbers. They wanted lights. We hired these guys who would climb up into the trees and tie lights up in the trees, which was pretty amazing. You know, and then it was also fire season. So we had, you know, the state fire patrol doing fire watch for the film, but they were, at the same time, there was a wildfire in the park where we were on the other end. And so literally there was like a day when where the chief fire guy comes to us, and he's covered in soot because he's literally just been fighting a real fire. And now he's showing up for his second shift to watch us film. He hasn't changed. And he's like, yeah. And we're just like, oh, you know, maybe you should go back to the real fire.
Yeah,
Watch
right.
us.
That's funny. So what haven't we covered? Maybe the brown, let's just briefly touch on the brownstone. And that interior was a build, right? And then the
Yes.
interior
Yes.
and the rooftop was real?
The rooftop was also a build. Finally, that was one that we bounced around a long time for. That house, I spent 3 months maybe just looking for that house, like literally pre-production, not scouting for any other location, had like 3 scouts on full time looking for one location for 3 months.
Because they didn't want to build it, is it in the,
They-
and
Well,
they
they knew that they always had to build the interior because of the gunfight at the end. So they knew they were going to destroy the house, and they knew. But the exterior, they really wanted to be in a neighborhood, and they had different visions of what the house was. You know, there's a garage in the house, like a garage in the house, which is a cheat because the house we use doesn't have a garage. So it just like we spent months, and they, you know, and then we originally were trying to find all the elements in the house. Like there's a pool in the house, there's the roof deck. And so we spent a lot of time looking at houses that actually did have pools in, you know, but they were never right. So at some point we finally started, okay, we got to break this up and, you know, take this piece over here and take this piece over here. And we settled on this house on Grove Street in the West Village, which was great because the homeowners had bought the house, renovated it, but hadn't moved in yet. They were still living on the West Coast. And they basically were like, here are the keys, do what you want. You know, they were never there. They were never there. They had a son, an adult son who lived in the West Village who would come by to just check on things. But once we made a deal, they were like, yeah, it's your house, have fun, you know.
That's kind of owners. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really easy to work with them. And but all we ever used was the front of the house and the street, as far as the hero house is concerned. And I know we had before about the neighbor's house, the hot neighbor. We ended up shooting the neighbor's house in the hero house, in the Smith house, since we never saw the interior, since it was a stage. We're like, well, we already have a location, let's just shoot inside this house for once. And so that was the cheat, to use the interior of that house.
Wait, you did something logical?
Like,
What a crazy guy idea.
yeah. Because the house was beautiful, and it was like, why we're never showing the inside of this beautiful house? Why don't we use it for something?
Yeah. And you said that that was the house that was in the same neighborhood as the Friends that was.
Oh yeah, so in the opening of Friends, like the apartment building that Friends live in is on the corner of this block. So we're shooting, you know, mid-block, but on the corner is the Friends house. And so all day, every day, there's just tourists showing up, taking pictures of the Friends house while we're shooting. And it was just a funny thing, because they'd come over, what are you guys doing? Because most of the people showing up with cameras weren't showing up because us, because they didn't know, you know, it was a new show, no one knew who we were. But
Right.
we were all showing up because the Friends house was on the corner.
Incredible. Before we let you go and move on to our next show, Gayhand, who's a fellow New Yorker, is asking about which park was it that the fire was in and that you shot in?
That's the name, Harriman State Park. It was up in Harriman.
Nice. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we lost Ross, and I'm glad we got Elizabetha in the process as well. But we are going to move on to Sugar, and Sasha's going to take that one away. Thank you so much, Ryan.
So Sugar is a genre-bending, highly stylized noir mystery that plays out beneath a blinding California sun, imbuing familiar Los Angeles locals with a disorienting, dreamlike quality that belies the heinous crimes that Private Eye Sugar will uncover. As he struggles with demons of his own, he is hired to find the missing granddaughter of a renowned Hollywood producer whose wealth and power is expressed by his sprawling estate. An elegant boutique hotel where Sugar resides is played by a sophisticated Spanish Revival residence that shows his own fondness for a chic Hollywood experience informed by classic films. The villain resides in an old house situated in an oil field, the motion of the pumps adding to the tension of the inevitable brutal confrontation to come. Seedy bars, rundown apartments, and gritty streets show a world where, far from the glamour, and a trip to the desert east of LA brings a revelation that propels the story into entirely new territory. So joining us today, we have Jason Stowell. And Jason, what was your role on this project?
I was one of the key assistant location managers.
Okay. How many of how big was the team?
The team was a total lead location manager, John Agoglia, and then three 3 other assistants and 3 other keys and 1 other assistant for a closer.
Okay.
Yeah, so a total of 5 or 6. Yeah, the day player every now and then.
That's a good size. So Los Angeles itself seems to play, it's its own character in this film, and it being sort of, noir-ish and hyper stylized. Did that factor into how you guys were scouting what neighborhoods you ended up picking? Like how much was actually dependent on, the vision, like the visuals, as opposed to something that was, more practical and maybe closer to a stage?
I think there was a lot of what they wanted was, that typical statement of organic. They wanted it to sort of feel real, not stage-like, and that because particularly the one director, Fernando, likes to move in a frenetic way with the camera, have it sort of handheld and loose. He wanted to be able to have places that he could navigate, that he could move through in a way that would feel as though you were sort of witnessing it as a bystander, as an onlooker, like Sugar is. So we often would find places that were less about being super attractive and more about being a place that would allow that fluidity and that space to move with the camera and give him the freedom to do that.
And
Yeah.
what about the house in the oil fields? That's a pretty interesting location. Can you tell us about that?
I'm sure plenty of Angelino folks who are scouts and location managers are very familiar with the Duquesne oil fields in Culver City, but that particular house just sits there unoccupied, and it's just got this creepy, ominous feel to it because it's just this. Well, A, it's a bizarre location for the house to be, and then number 2 is the age to it and the sort of I'm not going to say unique architecture, but just the sort of it stands out a little bit more than other places on a standard street in LA. It's got a lot more brickwork. It's got a lot of just different things. And then on top of that, the freedom to kind of beat it up pretty well when you want to, with a lot of the action that happened there, that offers a great thing there. And then Liz, who runs the oil fields out there, is always a fun personality to work with too. So that's one of the things when you're going to these places that you will be visiting time and time again on shows. It comes more for me to the personalities that run these places and who we're going to be spending our time with while we're there, because you're going to be returning there. So developing those relationships is kind of almost the more crucial thing, because they just come up again and again. I can't count how many times, just like I'm sure a lot of other Angelinos have, how many times we spent in that oil field for different shows,
There are a lot of iconic locations for Los Angeles that we end up seeing in this series. We've got, I believe, Kohl's, we've got Bordner's. How was filming in Los Angeles recently? Because I know, maybe even a couple of years ago, it would be a little bit more challenging to film in some of these places. But now that maybe a lot of stuff has moved out of town, like, is there an increased tolerance to our film nuisance, or did you find any differences this time around?
The only thing that ever seems to help a little bit is a name. So if you have a star that seems to have a better, stronger fan base, that helps push things along. But other than that, it's everyone here is savvy. They know what's going on. They've dealt with it before. The patience levels are always sort of a razor's edge. You're walking a razor wire because you have to foster these things enough to make it seem like your experience is going to be different than the 12 experiences they had before, which we ultimately know is not going to be that varied. But we try to always pitch, as we all do, that we're going to be the best behaved crew you've ever met. And we're going to do it different. And as much as we can land within those parameters and actually make that a reality and a truth, that's what we aim for. But no, it hasn't really changed. And even with us knowing as an industry that there's a somewhat slump of work, we the general public doesn't seem to acknowledge that in the same factors. So it always comes down to monetary issues. And in LA, you got to spend the money to make things happen. I mean, and I'm sure that's that way everywhere, but particularly here with neighbors, residents, merchants, etc., they all have expectations that have already been set and met by other companies. So we just try to wash and repeat with that stuff, and hopefully keep it at a reasonable level so that the next team that comes on in there doesn't have to get blown up either.
The hotel, I'm so curious about that because it sort of looks like a quintessential, Southern California desert-y boutique hotel, but I don't recognize it. It sort of looks like it was maybe modeled after the Chateau Marmont, but where was that?
That's Altadena. It's a private residence. And the thing that really got us pushed in that direction was the minute they said it could be a boutique hotel. We were looking at all the standards, bigger places, sort of iconic LA hotels. But the minute they mentioned that it could be this sort of off the beaten path boutique hotel where Sugar would want more privacy in his own bungalow, it really pushed us in the direction of private residence. And then we started looking for sort of a somewhat Spanish style or Mediterranean style property. And this one just landed well. The way it flowed with the sort of front house that had a an entry like to a small hotel, but then we had the property in between with a nice layout with a what could appear as a secondary house. The woman who owns the property does pottery, and she's very prideful of her garden. So she has this whole pottery studio that could actually serve well as a poolside cafe. And then behind that, she has guest bungalows that stretch out, and those could serve as Sugar's room. So it was a nice direction to look for the Spanish style bungalow or the boutique style hotel. But then when we landed this property and the layout just sealed the deal because it just served all those separate purposes and gave us enough scope to make it believable as a hotel and a private residence. And having that private residence was also beneficial, obviously, because scheduling around other guests and hotels and holidays, etc., through half a year, that always becomes an issue. And having this one particular place, even though the residents are a particularly busy group of people, it was still more manageable than dealing with the entire schedule of a hotel, you know?
Of course, yeah, because one of the questions I had was if you were actually filming at a hotel, like what the logistics of that would have been. And this sounds, like it was actually a manageable piece because you were just sort of dealing with one person.
Yeah,
One
exactly.
property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we always love to hear tales from the trenches, especially from key assistants who are really the boots on the ground a lot of the time. Are there any specific scenes sort of when you watch the show that kind of, give you a giggle or, make you laugh because what was happening behind the scenes that was just completely crazy that, the lay person viewing would not be privy to?
Well, I always find it amusing when ideas that start out in the beginning of the show seem like a cute or creative idea, but as the reality of them continues to the rest of the show, it starts to lose its shine. And one of those was the concept of having Sugar always have the dog with him. The first couple episodes, we started having the dog in the car with him all the time. But after a while, it became not only, oh my gosh, we have to have this dog with us everywhere and make sure that it's safe and cool and comfortable. But, also we're driving around with a dog in a convertible. I don't know if that's great. And then number three, it even became down to even Colin Farrell himself saying, why do I always have this dog with me? So between those three things, we just sort of, it sloughed off quite a bit towards the end. And the dog started making less and less cameos in the show because it was just, it just didn't have an anchor in anything really. And logistically, it became a little bit of a nightmare. So,
I was wondering about that because there was quite a lot of driving work just in general because Sugar's always in his car sort of driving to and fro and you get those moody shots and then eventually you've got a dog in there with him too. Like was he
Yeah.
strapped in, or like
They would do shorter runs with that, but we also just ended up that was the other memory I have a lot was it wasn't difficult logistically, but it was always a thing to make sure that they had enough wide enough berth at whatever location we were at to go out after they were done with a part of the day to just spend at least half a day driving with that Corvette. They always wanted free reign, and we just do the grids here in LA, but it was just making sure we had enough flexible officers to let them sort of go off the beaten path some, make quick stops, pull over, throw out the camera on sticks, grab a shot with a Cinerama dome right behind him and move on, not make this into a three-ring circus, but grab some of those quick pops of iconic places without making it a full-blown production, because a lot of that stuff becomes a lot easier if you handle it that way. If you sort of just, permit the sidewalk across the street, throw it in the background, move on, instead of, setting a full crew there and just taking over the street. It was a lot easier that way. And so there was a lot of days where we were spending days in a parking lot watching them come and go as they went for their next round of driving shots, and just laying out the right overhead maps for them to know the routes they had for that day and the the general grid and space they had to work within those regions. And it was always just quadrant off a section of whatever part of the city we were going to be in and giving them, hey, here's the 5-mile radius basically you're working in for that day.
And then probably our last couple of questions, Ruby's house, what part of town were we in for that? Because that was some sort of really specific architecture that I think the director was looking for that, right?
For the Craftsman, yeah, the Craftsman, and another Altadena house, which ultimately the inside was minute. So they built the interior on stage, but the exterior was all done in Altadena as well. And it wasn't that far from the hotel too. They were pretty close to each other. So those two locations often got paired together on a shooting day just because it worked out conveniently for making a move from one to the other.
And then Melanie's house, which we see a lot, it's that really kind of beautiful Eichler. What part of town are we in for that?
Granada Hills, as we know, that's an Eichler neighborhood. I grew up in Northern California, so I grew up with Eichlers in San Rafael, California. So that's kind of where I was first introduced to that architecture. But yeah, Granada Hills, chock block full of them. And we just felt it was kind of that retro cool that would match the character's feel of being this sort of ex-famous rocker, and it sort of all fit into her sort of aesthetic and feel. And also, anything that obviously we're dealing with much different decades with his older films and everything, but anything that sort of had a classic stylized graphic feel to it was definitely something that was considered. And so ultimately when they saw the architecture there with the Eichlers, the creatives fell in love with that. And that's why we pushed there. But there's another neighborhood where they've had it up to here with filming. So you have to manage everyone in that neighborhood quite nicely because everyone goes there for the Eichlers. Yeah.
All right. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much for answering all of our questions. And we're going to go back to JJ for Reservation Dogs.
A group of teens coming of age in the native community of Oak Hearn, which is in Oklahoma. And they filmed in some where they were stranded, actually, the characters, in some never before filmed Great Salt Plains State Park and National Wild Refuge. And many other interesting locations, which we will talk about. And I want to give a warm welcome to Chris Kucharski. I hope I said that right, Chris. Hello.
You did. Yeah.
Good. Great. So, this is a really interesting story. And a big factor of this is the feel and the vibe of a group of indigenous teens that are living actually, Chris, are they on a reservation or just out off of the reservation, or reservation adjacent, I guess we should say? Can you jump into that a
Yeah.
bit? And
Yeah,
also
so a lot of people don't realize, but Oklahoma doesn't technically have reservations in the sense that New Mexico or Arizona do, where they're, established lands that belong primarily or directly to the indigenous people. Over generations of gentrification, white people have sort of bought up parts of what are native lands and what the Supreme Court has now ruled are native lands in the McGirt decision. But those native lands are governed by, municipalities basically at this point. And then the sovereignty of the native people sort of faded into the background over time. And so as part of the prep work that we did on this show, we shot primarily on the Muskogee Nation land, which is south of Tulsa. And so we talked with their Congress beforehand, introduced a blanket permit for the Muskogee Nation tribal sovereign land. And then what we did is added addendums as we knew individual locations were going to come up. So it's a little different than if you were, filming on sovereign native property in New Mexico or something like that.
Is the Great Salt Plain State Park and the National Wild Refuge, is that also part of in the native or indigenous lands, or is that a completely different entity?
Yeah, so actually, that's part of the absentee Cherokee tribe, which is a faction of the Cherokee Nation that split during the Trail of Tears, and that is now managed by the National Wildlife Refuge, but it is native property. And just as a general rule of thumb, you can consider 99% of Oklahoma as native land. It's just mostly governed by white municipalities because over time, white settlers have either stolen the land outright generations ago, or they, bought in because a family member of a native family sold it to a white person, and it was just like naturally gentrified. So it's a really like Oklahoma is very unique in that fact. It's really sad in some parts because of that. But like a lot of these native areas are economically suppressed and stuff like that. And they're the same reasons that you go into a minority neighborhood in the South. It'd be a very similar situation.
Are you Oklahoman? Are you a native?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm originally from Texas, but I live in Oklahoma City. So, and I'm based out of here. I'm actually in Pennsylvania right now on a different job, but based out of Oklahoma City.
Interesting, because Chris has also worked on Killers of the Flower Moon, which is nominated in a different category, and I would guess that you guys, I mean, you guys are starting to see a lot more filming in general now in Oklahoma, are you not?
Yeah, and I mean, Killers of the Flower Moon is a very like quintessential story that sort of illustrates the point that I was getting at, which is, sometimes by sinister means or other times by just natural gentrification of an area and capitalism. These lands have been sort of evaporated, but luckily, like the Supreme Court has sort of said in the last couple of years that no, that like that sovereignty hasn't gone away, even though the landowners are different people.
Yeah, and I wanted to, Stevie's got a good question, which I wanted to cover as well. That property, so that storyline with the deer lady, which is fascinating. Like the diner is amazing, and the
Yeah.
school where the deer lady was basically imprisoned as a child. Can you what is that location?
Yeah, so that's actually Bacone College, which is a college that was originally a liberal arts college that is famous for the Bacone method. That was a native painting method that came out in like the 60s and stuff. But at any rate, Bacone College is now sort of it's fallen into disrepair, and we shot there, but on that property there was an actual boarding school, and Sterling, our showrunner and director, was really hesitant, I think, to do a thing about boarding schools because that's such a different situation for so many Native people, and a lot of Native tribes have like very complicated relationships with boarding schools. But yeah, it was a really fantastic location. And my team did a really amazing job because there was a lot of artwork still there that we needed to move. And so we hired a registrar and had that professionally moved to some other Native museums in the area and stuff. And I don't know, we kind of ended up running into a lot of situations that were very similar, where we were kind of working with Native populations to kind of help them do stuff in a way that was like, more respectful, and we could like give we could kind of share the burden of a lot of the work that they might not have had the means to do. So, and that was one of those situations where we were able to relocate some really fantastic pieces of artwork to a place that was, you know, climate controlled, and then would be able to preserve it over time.
And you worked on all the seasons of this show, yeah? So
Yeah, I worked on all 3 seasons. Yeah.
so you must have it must have been interesting developing these relationships as you went along. It's
Yeah,
really oh, go ahead.
truly an honor. Like that was like truly an honor. Like getting to know all of these like individual communities and all their nuance and stuff like that was really fantastic. I'm white and you know, getting to understand that kind of stuff that I'd been around like for my entire life was really special.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a I was surprised by how much I had not really watched the series, and I was really surprised how much it touched me and how much I enjoyed getting immersed in that culture. And I think it's, I mean, you know, it's been called a groundbreaking series, and I see why. So the series opens with this bear. One of the kids is looking for his father in California, and then it's this trek back to where they live, that, you know, that becomes his hero's journey, let's call it. So how did that go down for you guys? Like, how far away did you actually go from your base, and how willing were you guys to, you know, kind of embrace the road trip aspect of the road trip?
I mean, I would say I was really willing, but the producer wasn't super willing. You know, Oklahoma is it's really varied. A lot of people don't recognize or realize it until you drive through it, but it's really arid in the west, and then it gets really lush, and it's like more, you know, Appalachia on the east end of it, and a lot of the stuff that we were shooting in Tulsa, there are little pockets where you can go, like up into Osage County, where Osage County, and where Killers of the Flower Moon was shot. And so that's like rolling plains that look very much like the Flint Hills, and it goes on for forever. But then also, if you go south, it's more green and stuff like that. And so we were able to do driving stuff, you know, for the most part, kind of right around our little backyard, right around the Tulsa area, and be able to achieve most of those shots. The Great Salt Plains that you mentioned is actually on the western, like northwestern edge of the state, kind of just before you get to the panhandle of Oklahoma. And so that was a trek for us, but that was something that, you know, Sterling knew of, and it was scripted, obviously. And so, you know, we were locked in there. We were going to go there, and I was really happy to go there. I'm a birder, and that's a super awesome birding stopover place with a lot of really unique species that stop over there that depend on that place for their migration patterns. And so while we were there, you mentioned it earlier, but while we were there, we had a biologist with us that basically, you know, told us in no uncertain terms, like, if these 2 species show up, like, we shut it down. And so, you know, we were lucky in the fact that we were in between migratory patterns. It would have had to have been something that was way blown off course for it to happen, and we got lucky and it didn't happen. But you know, it was cool. It was really cool, and they worked with us, and they were really happy. And you know, Sterling's like sort of his allure of being like native Oklahoman. He's a native Seminole and a Muskogee tribal member. You know, a lot of people were really sort of like interested in working with us and stuff like that. So it was really great.
It's really great. What so I want to probably this will be our last question for you, Chris. and I'll give it to you, dealer's choice. It's either sort of what have we not talked to you about yet that you would find fascinating about this season's work, or similar to the question Sasha asked before, is there a specific scene in the show that makes you smile when you think, or or makes you laugh about it when you know what was going on behind the scenes?
Well, so like there was a jail that we shot at in the end of the second season, and then again in the third season, and that jail had been robbed of all of the copper. It was a closed city property that they were using as a storage facility for surplus furniture, and so it was like when I say chuck full of furniture, I mean chuck full, like floor to ceiling. And so we had a significant amount of work that went into that, and basically everywhere the camera looked, we pushed stuff to a different part. And so if you turn 180, like you would see just blocked, entry and exit points and stuff like that. And so in order to get that place ready and a fire marshal to say yes to us and all of that kind of stuff, it took some significant doing. And again, like no lights, no air conditioning, no heating, anything like that. We were walking into a blank space. So that was something that I was like, I got into this business because I like complex logistical problems, and that was one of those ones. It was really cool.
Yeah, I don't know anybody else that likes complex logistical problems. Of course, we're all weirdly addicted to solving that kind of stuff. Well, Chris, thank you so much. And now we're going to turn to Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. We have with us David Campbell Bell and Ben Furminger, and I'm going to launch into a brief description of the film, which is: beautiful global backdrops co-star in Ethan Hunt's latest globe-trotting adventure, pushing the franchise to new heights by delivering epic action set pieces across spectacular landscapes like the Liwa Desert, Abu Dhabi International Airport, Venice's Palazzo Ducale, and the fjords of Andalsnes. Hunt's interaction with his environment is a crucial part of the story, with each dynamic background contributing to the high-stakes atmosphere and global scale of the narrative. The romantic beauty of Rome offsets a fierce car chase through ancient streets and down the Spanish Steps, while Norway is the site of a rooftop battle atop a speeding train along the gorgeous Alpine Rama Railway and cruises jaw-dropping motorcycle base jump from Norway's 4,000-foot Helsekoppen mountain. You guys have both worked on a lot of big action adventure films, a lot of Mission Impossibles, Jason Bourne. That seems to be sort of your milieu. How do you guys work as a team, and how big is your team? Where did you shoot this film overall, and how do you sort of divide up the duties?
I started the project quite early on. I was very fortunate enough to be involved in the scouting. There was a big, long pre-production on Mission. And I mean, I went to sort of, I think, like 20 countries. So, I mean, I was very, very fortunate. I'd use up the entire time just listing the places they sent us to. And then basically the way it works with Mission is McHugh and Tom usually start with a big stunt set piece and work backwards from there. I mean, one of the things that they always knew they wanted to do at the beginning of this movie was they wanted to do a car chase in Rome. That was sort of established. We didn't have to go and find Rome. We know exactly where it is. So we hooked up with Enrico quite early on because we knew it was going to involve a huge amount of prep and permits to pull it off. Venice, we weren't definitely shooting in Venice. That came later on. McHugh wanted to do a night sequence there. He always felt like Venice was shot during the day and sunny and very beautiful. And the more we sort of started scouting Italy, the more he realized he wanted to kind of shoot Venice in a slightly different way and actually not be on the canals very much. Part of Venice was sort of, the idea was sort of borrowing from almost the Thomas Crown affair of seeing people running lots of streets, passing on bridges, and Ethan could just never quite get to rescue Haley Atwell's character. His name escapes me right now.
Wait,
and
let me look
Ilsa,
through my
Ilsa,
notes. I
he
might
could-
be able to find it.
yeah, he could never quite get to Ilsa, so
Ilsa.
that kind of came later. In terms of building the team and everything, is once we'd established on the countries. I mean, Ben and I had worked together previously a few times. Ben had worked abroad many times, and we knew that he was certainly really apt at logistics, big scale logistics servicing. And, I think Ben very early on was tasked with, figuring out the Norway of it all. And not just that, one of the things with Mission that's slightly different than all the other films is that when you're not filming, it's almost more challenging than when you are filming, because once you shoot, you kind of get to put Tom sort of in a box, you know what you're doing every day. When he's not filming, he's training. And again, we spent almost a year training with him in the UK. And Ben was a huge part of setting up the sites where we had a motorbike ramp where Tom could be practicing all of his motocross, but it had to be the same place where Tom could also be doing his base jumps. Because if there was bad weather, he's on the bike. Once he'd done the bike, he'd start base jumping. And then down the road, we had a mock ramp that we had built that was of the same trajectory as the one that was going on the mountain in Norway, so that he could practice, just making sure that there was the detachment from the bike. That took a lot of work.
Do you have any photos of that by any chance? The ramp?
Do you know what? I actually don't. Do you, Ben?
Okay.
Have you got anything of the training stuff? I mean, one thing that happened is we filled it with 2,000 cardboard boxes for the bike to land on. Tom was on a wire. And I think on one of the first jumps we did, the bike was supposed to have an automatic engine switch. So as soon as Tom left it shut off. Didn't work. Landed on the cardboard boxes and set them on fire. So we had a lot of PAs that had to come out for the next day and build another 2,000 stump boxes. But no one was hurt. But yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate in so much as I got to do all the prep at the beginning, and then basically you whittle it down. I mean, the only brief we ever get from McHugh and Tom really outside of the Rome thing was, find me some awesome shit I can blow up.
I was wondering when you were talking about Tom Pratt, like the whole part of that being more difficult. I was also thinking like they're still conjuring so that's the hardest part, right? Because they're still also conjuring up like, oh, and we could do this too. And
I mean, constantly up until after we've shot it and then we reshot it. I mean, you never shoot anything once on Mission Impossible.
Right.
I can't think of anything we shot once. Part of that is just the process that they work with. I mean, McHugh has a lot of respect for location filming, which is great for us, great for our sort of skills and our creative eyes. Is he lets the action be dictated by the location. So rather than going out with a script and saying, hey, I want to find a location for this sequence, it's right, look at this location. What can I do at this location? What does it give me? And on the one hand, that's incredibly exciting to be part of, because it really does sort of allow us to, our creative juices to be part of that process as the narrative develops. It's also very hard because, part of it, if the process is taking McHugh to then locations that he looks at you and you're like, I don't get it. Why am I here? And you're like, well, I kind of,
yeah, I had this idea, but then you get there and you're kind of like, yeah, maybe it wasn't such a great idea. Right.
Not every pitch lands well, but more wins than losses.
No, who's the logistics monster on your shows? Is it you, Ben? Or
Ben.
So you're Mr. Overhead Map, nail down the lockups, all that sort of stuff.
Correct. Moving all the crew and the equipment around. Yeah, it's a bit of a beast. But you, like Dave was saying, you get into a rhythm after a while. We don't just move small pieces of kit. It's huge amounts of trucks and trailers and equipment that gets shipped all around the world. I think when we were in Norway, we had something like 12 helicopters that we were using to get all the equipment up to the top of the mountain to build the ramp. I think it was a total of 250 tons of scaffolding.
Yeah, something like that.
Was brought in from Germany to build the ramp over a 13-day period. And then
didn't we move it slightly, the ramp at one point as well?
Yeah, we were about a third of the way along.
It's not on wheels, guys, right? It's like not like yeah, it's like
Yeah, it was correct. We were about a third of the way through and we had to move it because by the time we'd got to the far end where the cliff was, we would be a few meters out, and that would have been the difference of being able to make the jump or not safely. So it was a huge amount of planning, but we got it done in about 13 days with a extreme rigging crew that we worked with previously on another job in Ireland, and they just worked through all types of weather, all times of the day, and got it done in time. And Tom came up, I think, on day one and jumped 6 times in a row, which was just incredible to watch, that we've been practicing for. And then we did a couple more days, and then we packed it all down again and got off in another 10 days. So it's a real quick turnaround and straight on to the next location, setting up, making sure it's seamless so that when Tom gets there, he's not waiting around and he can get straight back into his training. It's such extreme stunts that we're doing with him that he doesn't want to be waiting or having to find something else to do that's more dialogue scene based. You know, we do the stunts, we get them done, and we move on to the next one, and it's a continual sort of path until they're all done, and then we're back in the studio either doing dialogue or picking up any extra pieces that we have to do because of, you know, whatever. But
the movies always start with the big set pieces when we go into production, don't they? You know, always start with
always,
Tom's
right?
biggest done. You know, get
that
that done
to
and
be able to
dusted.
ease into it, and
Yeah.
it's never like that, right? It's always like, okay, we're gonna do this humongous thing first, right out of the gate.
Day one. Which I kind of get.
Scary, because you think if like a actor injures themselves, you know,
like breaking his foot in London, when he jumped on the rooftop at some point. That was our second day of filming, I think.
Oh, so there was an injury. So tell us about that.
But that was that was on a different. That was on the mission before, I think. Sorry. But yeah, but the principle was the same. As it was the jump that we were doing from St. Paul's over a couple of rooftops, and yeah, he broke his foot on. I think it was the second day of principal photography in the UK.
It was the first take. It was the take that was used in the film.
Wow!
So we got a real reaction from him.
So we ended up shooting the rest of it in the summer, even though in the winter. We started in the summer, finished in the winter.
Oh God. When you've shot, you shot at all these historical places like Spanish Steps, right? Like how do you do that? Like, is that, I know they're pretty open to filming, but still what you guys were doing was pretty abusive, right? Like pretty hardcore for an old historical.
Yeah, the Spanish Steps is our friends in visual effects. I mean, they were very forgiving, the authorities in Rome, but that was one step too far, no pun intended. It was we built a huge amount of that on the back lot. So everything where the car interacts with the crowd was all built on a back lot, and then we did plates and everything. But no, they were never going to let us do that. I mean, we were barely allowed to go and sit on the Spanish Steps when we'd go there on a tent.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering.
But everything else in Rome, I think everything else is always Tom driving. You know, the idea of knocking off the car doors right at the beginning is so that you can see that it's him. You know that he's, you know, there's no low loader, there's no tracking. But you know, we've got pursuit arms, but he's not. He's not on a low loader ever. It's
he's not on a rig in a studio with a green screen. The only green screens we ever tend to use are sort of at the end of the roads, so we can't see all the film crew and the trucks.
Right.
You know, it's done for real, and that's why we test for so long prior to shooting, so that we can get it right and get those amazing shots of Tom doing everything for real.
As every Mission Impossible is, it's just like a nonstop roller coaster of like these insane stunts. And for you guys, it just feels like the bar is getting raised every single time. So do you feel that pressure that that like, how are we going to do this one? That, that everything is just getting like, what was your Mission Impossible on this one? Let's say.
But finding countries to shoot in that they either hadn't, that Tom has not done a great big set piece. I mean, London's always very tricky between the Mission films and Edge of Tomorrow. You know, you run out of these spectacular landmarks. You know, Mission always wants to be in those you know, you want to be shooting in the movie poster. You know, you want the Colosseum, you want the Eiffel Tower, you want St. Paul's Cathedral. And you know, you look across Europe and you slowly start sort of running out of these really big sort of global landmarks that you know, the USA are going to like, and you know, Asia's going to know. So it's tricky. And the hard, on top of that, the harder thing is then knowing that it's all very well to find the spectacular backdrop, but you know that there's going to be some crazy stunt involving rooftops and Tom and helicopters. I mean, McHugh always says there's only two types of scenes in Mission. It's either a heist where they're breaking in somewhere, or it's an escape getting out of somewhere. Everything else is basically Benji in a stairwell on a phone explaining everything else that's going on. So
I always say there's a car chase, there's a motorcycle chase, there's some aerial stunt, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like you.
It's a sort of playground for Tom to do. I mean, these extreme sports that he loves. I mean, the speed flying that we did on the last show. I mean, he trained extensively for that. I mean, that is an incredibly dangerous sport. But yeah, it's tough.
So
yeah, he especially for the parachute training this time around for the speed flying. We took a whole training unit to New Zealand specifically to learn this stunt and train for 6 weeks prior to any other rehearsals in the UK. And it was the one thing that I wouldn't say Tom was nervous about, but certainly was, you know, the hardest thing he was going to do. Tom has ridden motorbikes and jumped out of planes and done car driving for multiple years. You know, he's one of the best at doing it on and off camera. But the sort of dangerous aspect that comes with, you know, jumping off the top of a mountain with your parachute already open and you know, trying to foresee any winds that, you know, might take you back into the mountain cliffside is very difficult to sort of learn. So I think he was up to, was it tens of thousands of jumps off of cliffs by the end, Dave, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's incredibly hardworking.
Yeah,
he mastered it. He did it, you know. But he's once he's got his head fixed on something and he's you know, going for it, there's no turning back. He will do what he needs to learn to do that extreme sport and get it shot for the film and then move on to the next extreme sport that he wants to learn. But he seems to push himself as well every film. Like he's done jumps out of planes. Then on Mission 6, we did a jump from 25,000 feet with oxygen for real, which he trained for
a halo jump, they call it.
Yeah,
high altitude, low opening
jump, which he trained for in the UAE with the United Arab Emirates Air Force on oxygen. It's crazy. I mean, these are the things that normal people just wouldn't even think to do in their day lives, you know, as hobbies. So
yeah. And what does it take? So speaking of that, like, what does it take for you guys to prepare for those kinds of big stunts?
A huge amount of groundwork getting the permits, and not just that. I think building very strong relationships, knowing that it's going to change. I mean, we're always going to ask for more. I mean, they're fascinating filmmakers, Tom and McHugh. I mean, and the process of which they work, where it's, you know, they reverse engineer into a script. I get it; it's not for everyone, but it sort of works for the Mission franchise. But the tough thing with that is that they work very hard and they have very high expectations of the team around them. You know, so that, you know, they expect us to deliver, which is a great feeling when you do. But it does put the pressure on, knowing that you're trying to set up these great big set pieces and knowing that everything that you're discussing is also a bit, and we're probably going to change it on the day if we can just caveat every permit with that, you know, which is great when you're going to somewhere like Rome and closing it for 3 weeks and, you know, and the schedules don't work. I mean, you know, things happen outside of our control. You know, COVID happened.
COVID,
on a social distance in Venice was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, COVID was a challenge on its own. I think also, you know, for us,
it's funny because sorry, go ahead. I just want to say that it's funny that you forget that on a big film like this, that you guys were still in production during COVID. Like, you know what I mean? It's because now to us it seems so long ago, but you guys were in the thick of it.
Yeah, I think we were one of the first, if not the first, feature film in the UK to go back into production after COVID hit, and we sort of had to relearn how to work with each other, social distancing, you know, simple things of going up to someone in the morning and shaking their hand, say hello, like you couldn't do, and you felt rude not doing it. You know, you felt like you shouldn't be doing that, and just naturally going up to get a coffee at Craft and talking to someone, like you couldn't do it. You know, things were like everything was pre-made with orders and then put on a table for you to collect. And same with the catering and production meetings. You know, that's how Zoom became so popular. Everyone at home or in their own offices.
How did we cope before Zoom?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I
remember in my office, I was working on a TV series at the time, and they came in one day and they said, okay, we're going to put in separations. And they like hung these huge plexiglass sheets in between us so that, you know, we couldn't breathe on our fellow office mates.
And I think, you know, you work in an office is slightly different. You know, you go to a desk and you sit there and you can work from home potentially for a lot of the time, but teaching a film crew who a construction team who have to use their hands to build things in a workshop where they need multiple people to work on the same item at the same time. How do you do that without a team? You know, how do you test a stunt without you know, people around you? How do you sit in and do dialogue scenes with actors when they can't be next to each other?
And
especially
going back
a car, like when you have
before
two, sorry, what I was going to say, when you have two actors in a car and they're not allowed to be together for more than, what is it, 15 minutes or something like that, right? So
yeah,
you do that.
Creating these small bubbles. I was going to say, you know, before even we learned about COVID, I mean, we were in Venice, it happened. So after it all broke in China, the first place that COVID broke in Europe was the Lombardy region in Italy, which is where Venice is. So it was the Venice the Venice Festival. And we were hearing rumors of this, you know, this new sort of virus. And it was our second day of principal photography. And you know, the whole city shut down. We lost all of our permits, and at the time, it was dealt with as a kind of, oh, this is fine. This is a couple of weeks, and we shot down to Rome, talked about pivoting, flipping the whole schedule. And then, you know, as days went on, you know, the world was realizing, okay, this isn't a kind of thing that's going to be settled in a couple of weeks. But it was interesting. I mean, we literally been prepping for sort of 18 months, just got going and shut down, like many shows. But
going back to your original question, Jay, I think, you know, partly what drives us on these shows is, yes, the expectation is high, you know, but for us as, you know, location managers, being given a job where you get to, you know, basically go out and find the coolest places in the world and come back and show us is like the dream job for a location manager. You know, like Dave said at the beginning, to 20 different countries without really any other sort of guidance other than shoot cool shit and bring it back to me from the director. And it's like,
and tell me what I can do there. Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's I mean, that's just the golden ticket, you know.
And it's not often you get a brief, find me a bridge, we can put our own train on and blow up the bridge, you know, and you could.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is hard, and it does get tough sort of thing, because they do set the standard so high. Be interesting to see what happens on mission 9.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, it's space, outer space.
Yeah, exactly.
You laugh.
Next thing, Ben, you're going to be on a flight to Mars, right?
Yeah. I hope it's not a one-way ticket though.
Exactly. So speaking of that train sequence, let's I think that would be kind of fun if we could break that down a little bit. And I know you have a few visual aids that we can talk about for whatever you have that you might be able to share. So
I think so. I mean, from my end, the train sequence was, as a location manager, the thing that I was most proud of, because it was, they had Rome, they knew what they wanted to do there. The train sequence could have been, talking about the railway sequence, could have been anywhere. I mean, for a long time we were looking in deserts. Then there was a whole brief when we were looking at jungles. And what really worked with the Rama Valley was the reason why I think McHugh loved it is obviously spectacular landscape, but it's the fact that we had a road that ran alongside the railway line for so long and sort of almost interacted with it. It made it very interesting to be able to shoot it from a profile. I mean, filming a train of two people fighting, if you're on the train, means, you know, you're kind of just shooting down the barrel. But this road in Ralmer allowed us to be, you know, having a pursuit arm coming alongside it. And then we had a really wide river on the other side, so we could be covering with an aerial.
Do you have any photos of that, David?
I
mean, that show that, or
I've got a video. I've got a video.
oh, great.
And talking about lockups, I mean, it was one of the most exciting days I ever had on set was being on a train. Ben was doing the lockup on the road, and we had we had a helicopter on the river, we had the pursuit arm on the road, we had Tom fighting on the roof.
This is one of our first outings with the train in Norway, making sure that it fits along the railway with one of the carriages we built and the engine that we built with it.
How big would you say your crew, I mean, not just your, well, how big was your location team and how big was the whole crew there that day?
I mean, the whole crew going out on the train every day, we try to reduce it, but we were sort of 60 to 80 people on the train every day, I think. And then in terms of the location lockup that Ben did, I mean, it was incredible. It was, I mean, we had 50 kilometers of railway line, which we didn't have to lock up the railway line, thankfully. So the permit that we got from the Norwegian government to give us permission to put our train on their infrastructure arrived the day that our train, we had already set up our base camp. We were going to Norway. It literally arrived the day that our train rolled in and we had it in the sidings. That was when the Norwegian government finally said, yes, you can put the train on our infrastructure, which was lucky because we had a whole unit in Norway ready to shoot.
Just lucky.
I don't have many shots of the train because I was kind of on it. Ben,
but it is crazy that, you know, everybody thinks like, because I'm sure you started that permit like a year before.
Oh,
right,
months and months beforehand. But
and like the fact that it comes down to the day of or the day before is, you know, a nail biter, obviously.
And
even
the funniest thing was they
said, oh, sorry, I was going to say, even though they probably said it's coming, yeah, no, don't worry about it. But, you know, still you worry about it until it's like in your hand.
Sleepless nights. Exactly the same thing happened in the UK when we came and did the pickups. We took our train up to North Yorkshire Moors and we went onto a heritage railway line. And again, it worked for the same reasons. We had a road next to it so we could interact with our pursuit arm. We had to apply, even though it was a heritage railway line, we had to get permission from the Office of Road and Rail. And we had to do all these tests and do all this data analysis and prove to them that we could, because the trains that run on that railway line usually don't go quicker than 20 miles an hour. And Tom wanted our train at sort of, I think, 40 miles an hour, wasn't it, Ben?
Okay.
It went up to
correct.
And that permit again arrived after all the unit was in Yorkshire. We were all there, and it's, you know, sleepless night the night before. We got the final sign off from the from the ORR the day before our train rolled out, and we're like, "Ooh, we're all covered."
How many days did the train sequence take overall?
Oh wow. I mean, Norway we shot for 2 weeks, wasn't it, Ben? I think 2 weeks in Norway. Then we would have done pickups in the North Yorkshire Moors was just under a week's worth of filming.
Yeah, it's 4 days over a week.
The train gag coming off was 1 day. That was a one-hit wonder. And then obviously all the interiors, we built bucks on the stage for all the interiors, which was a few more weeks. So I mean, the whole sequence probably 4 weeks, Ben, something like that.
Yeah, I'd say probably in the range of about 40 shoot days, give or take. So it was,
that makes
sense. It was a huge undertaking.
It was a small amount out of the 286 that we shot in total.
I think you have some photos, David, that you showed me before we started.
This was the planning in the UK for the North Yorkshire Moors. Oh, Matt, this was our
I love it. Butch, Sundance.
I'm lying, that wasn't North Yorkshire Moors, that was the Ralmer Valley. I can see the...
And so you named it Butch and Sundance. Was there what's the logic behind the naming, or was that
They
sort
were
of
our two
sequence?
special, they were our rigged carriages that had loads of anchor points for the guys to be on the top. So we had, I think we had sort of 6 carriages in total. Some of them were heritage carriages that we had sort of purchased, and then Butch and Sundance were our 2 main hero carriages that were our, where we did most of the stunts, or certainly most of the fight. What else can I show you? Here's I mean, Ben can talk to you about all this prep, but this is the Tom gag.
How long is that runway?
240 meters.
And did you guys, it's built, right? I mean, it's built.
We built it from scratch.
What
we shipped in all the scaffolding from Belgium. Not last minute, but it was the only place that we could get everything we needed at the specification we needed for being sort of so high up on a mountain and dealing with extreme temperatures and being able to weigh it down and not make it blow over really, or blow off the mountain. But the only way we could get to the top of the mountain, that's Dave's photos from the UK, but the only way we could get to the top of the mountain in Norway was by helicopter for crew and equipment.
Wow.
So that was quite an achievement in building the ramp in the first place, but then that was only half the battle. Day one of filming, having 10 helicopters, well, I know 12 helicopters and 1 medevac helicopter to get crew of 100 or 110 people up to the mountain was sort of, the second part of the challenge, and that's before we'd started filming. But it was certainly an eventful way to travel to work.
Were there weather issues that you had to concern yourself with up there
We
as well?
did. Do you know what? We were so lucky during the filming, the few days we were up there, we were actually, we got away with the weather. It was okay. We had an issue when we came to take the ramp down. A storm came in, and we built the ramp out of sort of double skin, heavy duty ply, and a part of it had blown off during the storm and sort of gone off onto the mountainside. So we had to go and retrieve that, make sure we hadn't left anything on the mountaintop after we left entirely. So we did have a little bit of extreme weather. I think, I don't know if you've got any photos, Dave. I had somewhere, which I was trying to find some photos of the techno crane that we'd used covered in snow, and I was trying to find it.
I haven't. I've only got photos from before we had any rig there. And sorry, I didn't mean to skip around. I knew you were talking about trains.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I suddenly went straight to the
we went train to motorcycle to, but
trains. But I can get. This was the other part of the train. This was the UK sequence for the end of it. This is what built in a quarry in Derbyshire. And then we dug our sort of our. Yeah, it was quite a feat of engineering. And then we dug it out and built our own sort of lake.
Right. Wow. So crazy.
We the amazing thing about the UK shoot, we only had one chance at doing it because we didn't have repeat trains.
Right.
And
2 years worth of work.
Yeah, we had the location prepped and ready for about 8 months.
Yeah.
And we tried to go up a couple of times. We had the whole unit up there ready to go, the train on the tracks, and for whatever reasons, weather-wise, producers and director decided not to shoot. It wasn't sunny enough, or it was too windy, or potential that it might rain, and we stood the unit down multiple times. We're based in London, and this was up north, a couple of hours outside of London. So we take everyone up, stand them down, bring them back down, and we repeated it a couple of times. But in order to get the shots that we wanted for this train coming off the mountain, we had a camera company come in and they did a load of drone surveys of the location and built a digital environment on the computer of it. And then using VR, they allowed our director to choose where he wanted drones to have camera positions within the mountain as the train came off, so he could have the right height. It's not something that we could rehearse. You know, we didn't have test trains to do it with, so we did it this way instead, and we could replicate the train coming off at the correct height and the correct angle based on, you know, computer programs telling us the trajectory. And then on the day, we managed to put drones up and attach cameras onto the train itself, so that, you know, we got every shot possible at the best possible angle. And then
how many cameras, do you know how many cameras you had that day? Like including the drones?
Including all the cameras mounted on the train as well. I mean, I think it was like 12 or something.
Yeah, I was going to say 15, but it would have been something
Okay.
like that. Yeah, definitely.
It's incredible.
It's a lot of coverage.
Yeah. But I mean, really, really cool to think about that technology working in that way.
It was, and in a bizarre way. I mean, it was as hard as Norway was. It was really hard trying to find where we could do this stunt. Again, you know, we got quite far down the road of having a bridge in Poland. And then for various reasons, it sort of fell apart. And in the end, you know, we pitched the idea of, rather than having a bridge, you know, building our own. But it still came with, you know, we needed a certain height, we needed the right, you know, shear face. We then needed the land at the top to be able to build. It was just under 1/4 mile of railway that then, you know, to get the train up to speed, that needed to be flat. Obviously, without going through people's gardens or anything like that. You know, you trying to obviously avoid being in areas of natural outstanding beauty. All sorts of nuisance with newts at one point that took up in our
newts.
lake.
So right,
Newts, they always cause havoc, newts. So it was hard. It was tough finding somewhere. And the guys did an incredible job once we had the location, then building all the infrastructure, servicing it, you know, making sure that, you know, SFX had the space they needed for all the separate crane lifts of building that bridge. I was really impressed with everybody. It was a tough location to set up for a one-shot wonder.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like there were no easy locations on this film, right? I mean, it's like, it just seems like one after the other. I mean, you must have, like, when you got to some dialogue walk and talks, been like so happy, right?
But you know what, you would think, but the problem would be is we'd shoot them and then we'd leave the location, we'd say, oh, we want to go back tomorrow, so you'd be resetting it up again. So even those locations, I mean, I remember doing a meeting at Senate House. That's a well-used location in central London, has some amazing libraries, and we had been sort of, you know, we're going there, we're not going there, we're going there, we're not going there. And I'd just done a huge sit down with them and all of the university sort of, you know, the bodies that I needed on board. And I walked out this meeting and the phone rings and it's suddenly, oh no, we don't want to go tomorrow. Sorry, we're changing the schedule. Can you go back in? But we were going to want to go back at a later date. So I had to go back in and just, you know, I'm so sorry, everybody. We've had a schedule change, let everybody down. I got in the car driving back to the studio, phone rings again. He's like, oh, you didn't kill the location for tomorrow, did you? And it's like, yes, you told me. And it's like, no, we need it back. And that was for an interior library dialogue scene between Tom and Haley Atwell.
Right.
So even those sequences cause a lot of stress.
Yeah, it's like nothing is ever as it appears, right? Like,
Totally.
it always takes something.
Keeps us young and energetic.
I know. There's a bunch of so let me see. Well, you actually just talked about a few of them, but I just have, I'll just run through a couple. I have like a question about any interesting, like literally my question is, are there any interesting stories about the following? The desert area with the horses, the agency building, the airport, which I was particularly intrigued by the conveyor. There was like a conveyor going in one of the scenes.
Oh yes, with Benji finding
Benji.
Yeah.
the best thing about the airport sequence was when we got permission to go and film in Abu Dhabi, obviously there was no script. So, but we had to get the rebate ahead of going there. So we sort of wrote the script ourselves, basically saying, well, it's Mission Impossible. We're coming in. There's an extraction. And I think it was into the filming, McHugh suddenly was, oh, and that's where Benji gets the bomb from the airport. And it was, we can't have a bomb in the airport, seriously. Like, we're not gonna, you know. And I think we'd even shot Abu Dhabi at that point. We had done all the wides, and hence why I think the gag is in the end, there's not a bomb in the suitcase. It's meant to seem like a bomb. But that was, as I was saying to you earlier about the location leads the sequence. When McHugh saw all of that conveyor belt world underneath Abu Dhabi, that was what led him for the idea of Benji trying to find something and what was in that. And that was where he came up with the idea of, oh, it's a bomb that isn't a bomb. But it was the location that led the script completely. None of that existed at all.
Right. And the bomb was like the airport just said no bomb. Like, is that what was that?
I'm not sure. Yeah. I mean, basically, I think none of us would ever have been able to go back to Abu Dhabi ever again if we were showing their brand new airport to have a bomb underneath it.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And then the
unopened as well,
Go ahead,
brand
Ben.
new.
Exactly.
Yeah, they didn't want to scare anyone off before they'd even managed to open it.
Yeah. The other one I thought was really cool is that Venice, the like disco and the light show, and
I can show you some great photos of that.
Yeah, that looked like it entailed a lot.
I mean, a lot of that came from our designer, Gary Freeman did an incredible job. He found this lighting company that just, they lit up the Ducali, and that was tough. The Enrico and the team did a fantastic job of getting us the permits to go in there. I mean, again, it's one of the most, the most historical building in Venice. And it was obviously very sensitive, what we were allowed to do, what we weren't allowed to do. And they signed off on all the artwork. Oh, sorry, I thought I had more.
And you were able to, I mean, again, that feels like something where you took a historical site and had to control it for several days.
We shot out of ours. I think they had never closed for filming the Ducali before, and we did manage to get them. You know, with Enrico and his team did a fantastic job of getting us the permits. I think we closed it for 3 days in the end. I think exclusively to us. It was brilliant. I mean, being in there at night was it looked fantastic. It was a shame we couldn't put as many crowd in as we wanted to because it was post-COVID and social distancing. So the concept for that whole ball changed a bit because we couldn't have all the interaction with the extras that McHugh initially wanted. But equally, we didn't want to let the location go because it told the story of Venice and sort of Ethan's story of them all coming together with the entity really well.
When you're filming these like these Mission Impossible movies, I would guess that you get two reactions. One is, oh my gosh, fantastic, let's roll out the red carpet for you, and the other is like, no. Right?
That is literally the two reactions you get is some people are really excited and you know they love the idea of, I mean, they like the actor for starters, or they like the brand. And I mean, I think Ben and I, we never undersell Mission. It's the worst thing you could ever do is try to undersell what you're going to do in a location, because all you do is put yourself in a corner. You know, we're always very open with location owners, particularly when they're on board, and say, look, this is going to get bigger, this is going to change, but rest assured, we'll figure this out. This is what we do. You know, we do it very well, so bear with us, but it is going to grow. But yeah, then you do get some locations that are just, you know, we're not interested in you coming in.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean,
yeah, they're the tough ones. You know, it's you know, I'd like to think that you can, you know, try and get in anywhere, but yeah, we had a couple of locations that we just we couldn't make work, unfortunately. The scale of what we want to do, or the amount of time we want to be on site is just too long. You know, we just don't do anything quickly.
Yeah, got it. We probably should start to sort of wrap it up. Was there anything about the desert that we should touch on, or anything that you know, that we didn't touch on? Or we always one of the questions we like to ask is, was there anything that when you see it, it gives you a little sort of chuckle behind, like, because you know what was going on behind the scenes, that everybody else wouldn't know. So dealer's choice, good question.
Wow. I mean, the whole film. It's
I
I
was
mean, I don't know
gonna
how you
say.
feel, but it's always so difficult watching a movie you've worked on for so long because everything is within the context of remembering the scouts, the development, how it evolved. What would be my sort of chuckle moment?
I'm sure you breathed there were a lot of breathing sighs of relief moments. I'm sure that was true.
I mean, a lot of high fiving when we managed to get out of country successfully and it had all come together. They were some of the best moments. I mean, one thing I'd say is I can't think of many things that didn't make it in the film, Ben. Can you? I mean, have I totally forgetting? Like there
No.
weren't whole sequences or anything that got cut.
No, and I think if whenever we were at a location and we couldn't achieve something for whatever reason, we would go back to the studio and build it.
Mhm.
That was the attitude. It was like nothing's unachievable. We'll find a way to do it because we want to show off this location or this scene to the world. So
It was such a large part of both of our lives. I mean, it was I think we were on that show for 2.5 years, almost 3 years.
yeah, about that. Yeah. And I mean, as anyone that works in this industry knows, you spend more time with your colleagues than you do your family and friends. But on this show,
Most of the funny stories I've got, I probably can't say on this Zoom. That would sign my NDA.
they do become your family because you spend so much time with them, but you don't go home. Especially when you're working abroad. And owing to the fact we were in COVID, like in Norway, we hired an entire cruise liner and put all of the crew on it. So you woke up together, you had breakfast together, you got on a helicopter together, you're in a work together, came back, and it was like the only time you weren't with each other was at bed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of, I mean, it's like going to war together, right? In some senses. I mean, you're literally in the trenches together, knocking this stuff out however you can do it. And you really
and I think that's why the crew get on so well. You have to, and if you don't, then you don't survive.
Right, you don't make it to the next one or the next week, right?
Yeah, totally.
Those films would be unbearable if you just didn't have the support of the crew. I mean, I think Mission does have a fantastic unit in that regard. You all really do feel like you're in it together. And most of the time it starts from the top down. I think Tom and McHugh, have a good attitude on set. They both work hard. High expectations, but equally, they work incredibly hard as well.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you to everybody, all of our panelists and all of our attendees for joining us. It's been an amazing panel and you guys hung in there for 2 hours with us. I will say, bid you all adieu from everywhere in the world that you are.